One moment, life was normal. The next, the ground split open, buildings crumbled, and entire cities disappeared. These are the deadliest earthquakes in history, moments when the earth itself became the enemy, leaving behind destruction, survival, and stories the world will never forget. Tonight, you'll hear them all. Hey guys, tonight we begin with a topic that touches us all, quite literally, the very ground beneath our feet. For most of human history, the earth hasn't felt like a stable, unchanging home. It's felt like a living, breathing, sometimes very angry entity. Tonight, we're diving into the complete story of history's deadliest earthquakes and much, much more. So dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. From the dawn of civilization, long before seismographs hummed or tectonic plates were even a whisper in scientific thought, humanity has felt the earth rumble. These were the early whispers of a restless planet, terrifying and inexplicable. For ancient peoples, a sudden tremor wasn't just a natural phenomenon. It was a cosmic event, a divine message, or a monstrous warning. Tonight, we explore how these early civilizations perceived, feared, and tried to understand the Earth's terrifying shivers. Imagine living in a world without science, without warning systems, where your home, your temple, your very life could be swallowed by the ground in an instant. For ancient civilizations, earthquakes were terrifying acts of an unknowable force. Their interpretations, born from fear and awe, shaped their gods, their rituals, and sometimes their very survival. Let's start with Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization. Stretching across the Fertile Crescent between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, this region, home to the Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians, was no stranger to the Earth's violent moods. Geological fault lines crisscrossed the area, meaning tremors were a regular, often devastating occurrence. To the Mesopotamians, the Earth was not a static platform. It was alive, ruled by powerful, often capricious gods. When the ground shook, it wasn't geology at work. It was a deity expressing displeasure, rage, or a profound disturbance in the cosmic order. Think of it. You're walking through the bustling marketplace of Ur, discussing grain prices, and suddenly, the very ground begins to dance. Buildings sway, pots crash, and panic erupts. How do you explain that? For the Sumerians, the god Enlil, the lord of wind and storm, was often associated with earthly disturbances. When Enlil roared in anger, the skies thundered and the earth trembled. Earthquakes were manifestations of his fury, punishment for human transgressions, or simply a display of his immense, terrifying power. Other deities, like Ea, or Enki in Sumerian, the god of water, wisdom, and magic, who lived in the subterranean waters, could also cause tremors if his domain was disturbed. The earth wasn't just shaking. The gods were literally fighting or expressing their cosmic will. This belief system meant that responses to earthquakes were deeply religious. After a tremor, elaborate rituals would be performed to appease the angered deity. Priests would consult omens, seeking to understand the specific reason for the god's wrath. Sacrifices, prayers, and public acts of contrition were common, all aimed at calming the restless earth and preventing further destruction. Cuneiform tablets, the clay books of ancient Mesopotamia, contain numerous references to earthquakes as divine omens, often predicting impending disaster for kings or cities. If the ground shook, it was a message, and ignoring it meant inviting catastrophe. Buildings, while often massive, like the ziggurats, were built with stability in mind, but the primary defense against tremors was not engineering, it was piety. They didn't build earthquake-proof structures, they built God-proof prayers. Moving west, we arrive in ancient Egypt, a civilization renowned for its stability, grand monuments, an enduring sense of cosmic order, or Ma'at. Unlike Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt, particularly the Nile Valley, experiences fewer devastating earthquakes. Its geological setting is relatively stable, away from major fault lines. This lack of frequent violent tremors likely influenced their perceptions. For the Egyptians, the world was created and maintained by a harmonious balance between divine forces. Ma'at, the principle of truth, justice, and cosmic order, was paramount. When the earth moved, it was often interpreted as a disruption of this sacred balance, a sign that chaos, Isfet, was threatening to consume order. While there aren't many specific deities directly associated with earthquakes as their primary domain, the underworld gods like Osiris or Ptah, the patron of craftsmen and architects, sometimes linked to the earth's inner workings, might have been seen as responsible for deep rumblings. The pharaoh, as the living embodiment of Horus and the maintainer of Ma'at, would have played a crucial role in restoring order through rituals and offerings after any significant seismic event. Egyptian records, rich with details about daily life, religion, and monumental construction, are curiously silent about large-scale earthquake devastation. This isn't to say they experienced none, but it suggests they were rare enough not to enter the central narrative of their cosmic anxieties. Their monumental architecture, like the pyramids and temples, while not explicitly designed with earthquake resistance in mind, often benefited from massive, stable foundations and interlocking stone construction that inadvertently provided some resilience. The very stability of their land, in contrast to their neighbors, might have reinforced their belief in their unique divine favor and the enduring strength of Ma'at.
Now, let's cross the Mediterranean to ancient Greece, a land famous for its philosophy, democracy, and constant geological activity. Greece sits on the Hellenic Arc, a highly seismic zone where earthquakes were a regular, often catastrophic part of life. Unlike the Mesopotamians, whose gods thundered from the heavens, the Greeks often attributed tremors to a very specific, very powerful sea god, Poseidon, the earth shaker. Imagine living in a city like Sparta, Argos, or Athens, nestled among mountains and coasts prone to violent shaking. When the ground heaved, it wasn't an abstract divine anger. It was Poseidon slamming his trident into the earth's crust or roaring from his watery depths. Earthquakes were often seen as his direct punishment, a sign of his displeasure with human actions, particularly arrogance or broken oaths. For example, the devastating Spartan earthquake of 464 BCE was a pivotal moment. Thucydides, the great historian, recorded its immense destruction, which killed thousands and led to a Helot slave revolt that profoundly impacted Spartan society and foreign policy. Such events cemented the belief in Poseidon's terrifying power. Greeks responded to earthquakes with a blend of religious devotion and early philosophical inquiry. After a quake, sacrifices would be immediately made to Poseidon, sometimes including horses, a sacred animal to him. Oracles, particularly the famous oracle at Delphi, often incorporated seismic activity into their prophecies. A tremor during a consultation could be interpreted as a divine validation of the message or a warning. But uniquely, the Greeks also began to seek natural explanations, stepping away from purely supernatural ones. Philosophers like Thales of Miletus, 6th century BCE, proposed that the earth floated on water, and earthquakes were caused by the rocking of this immense liquid mass. Anaxagoras, 5th century BCE, suggested that subterranean winds trapped in caverns caused the earth to shake. Later, Aristotle, 4th century BCE, refined this wind theory, arguing that subterranean exhalations, or pneuma, trying to escape through cracks in the earth, caused tremors. While these theories lacked modern scientific accuracy, they represent a monumental shift, the attempt to understand the Earth's restlessness through observation and reason rather than just divine will. This was the nascent birth of seismology, not yet a science, but a philosophical quest for answers that didn't just involve appeasing an angry god. Journeying west from Greece, we enter the vast domain of the Roman Empire, a civilization that, like the Greeks, experienced frequent and often destructive earthquakes due to the active fault lines running through Italy and its expansive territories. To the pragmatic Romans, earthquakes, while terrifying, were largely interpreted as prodigia, or divine omens or portents. These weren't just random events, they were messages from the gods, particularly Jupiter, the king of the gods, expressing his displeasure or warning of impending disaster. Imagine living in bustling Rome, with its multi-story insulae, forums, and massive stone structures. A tremor could bring down entire blocks, spark fires, and send citizens into a panic. Roman historians like Livy and Pliny the Elder meticulously recorded instances of earthquakes, detailing their destruction and the subsequent religious rituals performed to placate the gods. For the Romans, observing and responding correctly to prodigia was a civic duty, essential for maintaining the pax diorum, the peace of the gods, which was believed to guarantee the empire's prosperity and stability. After a significant quake, the Roman Senate would immediately convene to consult augurs and priests, perform elaborate sacrifices, like the lectus sternia, where statues of gods were publicly feasted, and declare days of public prayer and supplication. The response was often immediate and comprehensive, involving both religious acts and state-sponsored repairs. Despite their strong belief in divine causation, the Romans, with their unparalleled engineering prowess, also engaged in practical responses. While they didn't develop explicit earthquake-proof architectural designs in the modern sense, their massive concrete structures, use of arches and vaults, and sophisticated building techniques like opus reticulatum, a net-like pattern of masonry that could distribute stress, inadvertently offered some resilience. Roman philosophers, too, echoed the Greek intellectual pursuit. Seneca the Younger, a Stoic philosopher, while believing that natural disasters were part of the cosmic order, encouraged philosophical resilience in the face of such events, focusing on what one could control, one's reaction, rather than the uncontrollable, the quake itself. The catastrophic eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 CE, which buried Pompeii and Herculaneum, further reinforced the Roman understanding of the Earth's sudden, devastating power, even though it was a volcanic event, not purely seismic. This combination of religious reverence and practical resilience defined the Roman interaction with their restless Earth.
But China also stood apart in its early, remarkable attempt at a scientific understanding of earthquakes. Around 132 CE, during the Han Dynasty, the brilliant scholar Zhang Heng invented the world's first known seismoscope. This bronze vessel, shaped like a large jar, had 8 dragon figures around its rim, each holding a bronze ball in its mouth. Below each dragon sat a bronze toad with an open mouth. When an earthquake occurred, a pendulum inside the jar would swing in the direction of the tremor, triggering a mechanism that caused one of the dragons to drop its ball into the toad's mouth. This was not just a curiosity. Historical records confirm its effectiveness, accurately indicating the direction of distant earthquakes, even when no one in the capital felt them. Zhang Heng's seismoscope was a monumental leap, shifting the perception of earthquakes from purely divine wrath to a phenomenon that could be detected and eventually studied, marking a unique blend of cosmic interpretation and empirical observation in ancient China. Crossing the Pacific to the Mesoamerican civilizations, including the Maya, Aztec, and the earlier Teotihuacan, earthquakes were integral to their complex cosmologies of creation and destruction. Unlike the monotheistic or polytheistic interpretations of the Old World, Mesoamerican cultures often viewed the world as having undergone cycles of creation, each ending in cataclysm and giving birth to a new age. Earthquakes were powerful, terrifying manifestations of these destructive cycles, often associated with specific deities. For the Aztecs, earthquakes were linked to the mythical 5 suns, a series of cosmic eras, each dominated by a different deity and ending in a cataclysm. The current era, the 5th sun, or Nahui Olin, or 4 movement,
was destined to end in a massive earthquake. The very symbol of this age was an earthquake glyph. This belief instilled a constant anxiety about impending destruction. Deities like Tepeyolat, the heart of the mountain, a jaguar god of caves, echoes, and earthquakes, were revered and feared. He was often depicted with a gaping mouth, symbolizing the earth opening up. When the earth shook, it was Tepeyolat's roar. Responses to earthquakes were deeply ritualistic and often involved human sacrifice. Sacrifices were believed to appease the gods, sustain the sun, and delay or avert the prophesied cataclysm. By offering human hearts or blood, they hoped to maintain the cosmic balance and ensure the continuation of the current age. Architecturally, Mesoamerican civilizations often built massive, tiered pyramids and monumental structures using flexible construction techniques, though it's debated whether this was explicitly for earthquake resistance or simply a byproduct of their building materials and methods. However, the sheer scale and longevity of structures in highly seismic regions suggest a practical understanding of stability. The destruction of major cities like the mysterious collapse of Teotihuacan was likely attributed in part to earthquakes, feeding into their cyclical worldview of life and death, creation and renewal, all tied to the restless pulse of the earth. So, from Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica, these ancient whispers of the Earth's restlessness were loud, profound, and deeply shaped humanity's early understanding of our planet. They were, in essence, our first attempts to put a name to the shaking, to find meaning in the chaos, and to survive on a world that never truly stands still. And for many of them, the story of the Earth's deadliest tremors was just beginning. Imagine living in a time when the very ground beneath your feet could betray you. Not just your house or your village, but the stable, unmoving earth itself. This wasn't some abstract fear, but a very real, very terrifying possibility for people living in the Dark Ages. With no scientific understanding of plate tectonics, no seismographs to predict tremors, and certainly no early warning systems, an earthquake was an act of raw, incomprehensible power. It wasn't just a natural disaster, it was a divine intervention, a monstrous stirring, or a terrifying omen. In medieval Europe, life was already precarious. Famine, plague, and constant warfare were ever-present threats. People lived closer to nature, their lives dictated by the rhythm of the seasons and the unpredictable whims of weather. Their homes, often made of wattle and daub or rough timber, offered little protection against a violent shake. A tremor didn't just knock down a wall. It felt like the very fabric of existence was unraveling. The silence before it, then the roar, the shaking, the groaning of the earth, the dust, the screams. It was chaos on an unimaginable scale, followed by a profound, eerie stillness that amplified the terror. Because they lacked scientific explanations, medieval people turned to the frameworks they understood: religion, folklore, and superstition. For many, an earthquake was the clearest, most terrifying message from God himself. It was perceived as a direct manifestation of divine wrath, a punishment for the sins of humanity. If crops failed, it might be God's displeasure. If a plague swept through, it was a warning. But if the very ground convulsed and swallowed homes whole, it was a profound, undeniable judgment. Clergy, from the village priest to the highest bishop, reinforced this interpretation. Sermons after a tremor would focus on collective sin, lust, greed, heresy, unholy alliances, or simply a lack of piety. The message was clear: repent, confess, or face worse. This wasn't just theological speculation, it was practical advice. Faced with such an overwhelming force, what else could one do but beg for mercy from the almighty hand that wielded it?
Across the vast Eurasian continent, in ancient China, earthquakes were viewed through a distinct cosmic and political lens. For the Chinese, the universe operated on principles of harmony and balance, particularly the interaction of yin and yang and the natural flow of qi, or life force. Earthquakes were seen as profound disturbances in this cosmic order, signs of imbalance between heaven and earth, or sometimes a direct message from heaven to the emperor. In Chinese cosmology, The emperor ruled under the mandate of heaven. If the emperor was just and maintained harmony, the land would prosper. However, natural disasters, including floods, droughts, and especially earthquakes, were interpreted as heaven's disapproval, a sign that the emperor had lost his moral authority. This put immense pressure on the ruling dynasty. After a major quake, the emperor would often perform acts of self-correction, issuing decrees, pardoning prisoners, or even publicly confessing his shortcomings, all to restore the cosmic balance and regain heaven's favor. Mythologically, some believed the earth was supported by a giant turtle, dragon, or ox, and its movements caused tremors.
Earthquakes were also frequently interpreted as harbingers of the end times, direct fulfillment of biblical prophecies found in texts like the Book of Revelation, which spoke of the earth trembling and stars falling before the second coming of Christ. For a deeply religious society that believed in a literal apocalypse, an earthquake was not just a destructive event, but a chilling confirmation that the world was winding down. People would look for other signs: strange lights in the sky, unusual animal behavior, comets. Every unexplained phenomenon became part of a terrifying tapestry woven by divine will. This fear often led to mass confessions, frantic prayers, and large-scale public processions as communities sought to collectively appease God and avert further disaster. Imagine thousands of people, heads bowed, chanting, walking barefoot through the rubble of their homes, hoping their penance would be enough. Beyond official religious doctrine, local folklore and ancient superstitions offered their own vivid, albeit terrifying explanations for tremors. These were stories passed down through generations, whispered by firelight, giving a monstrous face to the unknown. One prevalent belief was that the earth was a living creature, and its shivers were caused by massive animals or giants stirring beneath the surface. Some tales spoke of gigantic worms or serpents coiling and uncoiling in the deep, their movement sending ripples of destruction above. Others imagined colossal beasts, perhaps the remnants of ancient defeated dragons, trapped in the underworld and struggling against their bonds. When the ground rumbled, it wasn't just a structural collapse, it was the groan of a titan, the thrashing of a beast too immense to comprehend. Another common explanation involved subterranean winds or imprisoned spirits. People believed that powerful gusts of wind, trapped in vast underground caverns, would seek escape, violently shaking the earth as they pushed against its crust. Or perhaps the restless souls of the dead or malevolent spirits from the underworld were stirring below, their unseen battles manifesting as tremors on the surface. These weren't just whimsical stories, they were attempts to rationalize the inexplicable, to give a tangible, if mythical, cause to the terrifying movements of the earth. These beliefs often had practical implications. Villagers might avoid certain caves or cursed spots known for strange rumblings. They might perform rituals to appease the earth spirits before building, or leave offerings to calm the monstrous forces believed to dwell below. Impact on daily life and social fabric. The pervasive fear of earthquakes, whether divine or folkloric, deeply impacted medieval society. Panic could spread like wildfire, often leading to social disruption. In the immediate aftermath of a tremor, people would rush into the open, fearing further collapse, often seeking the nearest church for solace and safety. Mass hysteria was not uncommon, with individuals experiencing fits or claiming visions, further fueling the belief in supernatural causes. The aftermath of a significant quake often led to accusations. Just as with plague or famine, undesirables might be blamed for invoking God's wrath or practicing dark magic that stirred the earth. Heretics, Jews, or anyone deemed an outsider could become scapegoats, facing suspicion and even violence. While the full-blown witch trials were a later phenomenon, the underlying belief in malevolent magic causing natural disasters was certainly present. Rebuilding after a quake was a monumental task. Without modern construction techniques or engineering knowledge, structures were often rebuilt in the same vulnerable ways. Timber frames might be used, which could flex slightly, but stone buildings were always susceptible. Survival often came down to sheer luck and a swift response. The emphasis was less on structural integrity and more on divine mercy. If a building stood, it was a blessing. If it fell, it was a sign.
Notable medieval earthquakes and their interpretations. While less documented than later scientific observations, medieval chronicles and church records offer glimpses into specific earthquakes and how they were perceived. One early medieval example is the Constantinople earthquake of 557 AD. This was a significant event for the thriving Byzantine capital. On November 14th, two violent shocks struck the city, causing widespread damage, particularly to homes and public buildings. Accounts by contemporary chroniclers such as Agathias and John Malalas emphasize the terror and the immediate religious response. Emperor Justinian I, a devout ruler, was deeply affected. He himself walked barefoot in a grand public procession through the damaged streets, leading prayers and penance, hoping to appease God. The city's massive population followed suit, engaging in fasting and prayer. The earthquake was interpreted as a sign of divine judgment, prompting widespread spiritual reflection and a renewed emphasis on piety. Despite the physical destruction, the response highlighted the absolute centrality of faith in interpreting and responding to such cataclysms. Later, in England, the earthquake of 1185 AD was widely felt across the country, causing particular damage to Lincoln Cathedral, where a crack ran through the building. Chroniclers of the time recorded the event, often noting the fear and the religious interpretations. Roger of Howden wrote of the horrible earthquake and the damage to churches. It was seen as a warning from God, urging repentance and moral rectitude. Similarly, the Tower of London earthquake of 1275, sometimes dated to 1276, caused alarm in the capital. Though details are scarce, the event would have reinforced the prevailing religious interpretations, leading to localized prayers and perhaps even public penance. A more devastating event was the Basel earthquake of 1356, one of the most significant seismic events in Central Europe during the medieval period. On October 18th, a series of powerful tremors, estimated to be around magnitude 6.0, struck the city of Basel and the surrounding region. It caused widespread destruction, toppling castles, churches, and houses across a large area of present-day Switzerland, Germany, and France. Fires, often ignited by overturned cooking fires in damaged homes, swept through the rubble, further exacerbating the devastation. Thousands of people perished. The response to the Basel earthquake perfectly encapsulates the medieval worldview. Immediately, it was interpreted as a direct punishment from God, possibly for the widespread sins following the Black Death, which had ravaged Europe just years earlier. Chronicles of the time describe people rushing to confess their sins, engaging in frantic prayer, and performing acts of penance. The local clergy led desperate processions, begging for divine mercy. Despite the physical reality of crumbled stone and raging fires, the spiritual interpretation dominated the public and private response. Rebuilding efforts were undertaken, but the memory of God's terrible judgment lingered for generations, shaping local piety and communal fear. In the medieval world, an earthquake was not merely a shake. It was a shiver through the collective soul. It was a moment when the unseen forces of the universe, whether divine or monstrous, made their presence violently known. And with no scientific explanation, humanity could only cower, pray, and wonder what sins they had committed to provoke such a wrath. Yet, even in this fear, the very act of observing these phenomena, however misinterpreted, slowly began to lay the groundwork for a future where humanity might, one day, begin to truly understand the restless pulse of the earth. Long before modern sensors hummed and seismic waves were charted, the earth had its own terrifying whispers. For ancient civilizations, these tremors were not geological phenomena, but direct communications from the divine. Imagine living in a world where the very ground beneath your feet could suddenly roar, buildings could crumble like sand castles, and the sea could rise up and swallow your shores, all without warning, all attributed to the wrath of an angry god or the restless stirrings of a cosmic beast. In the cradle of civilization, Mesopotamia, the earliest written records speak less of earthquakes and more of omens. A sudden shake wasn't just a physical event, it was a sign. Perhaps the great god Enlil was displeased, or a cosmic balance had been disturbed. While detailed accounts of seismic events are rare in Sumerian or Babylonian tablets, archaeological digs consistently reveal evidence of widespread destruction and sudden rebuilding in cities like Ur and Mari, often attributed to the unpredictable shifting of the earth. Imagine a bustling ziggurat, its sun-baked bricks towering towards the heavens, suddenly cracking, swaying, and collapsing into a pile of rubble. For these people, it was a terrifying reminder that even divine architecture could fall, a scar on the very landscape that was slowly reabsorbed by the dust of time, leaving behind only the archaeological record as a silent testament. Similarly, in ancient Egypt, the Nile Valley was generally less seismically active than its neighbors, but not immune. The monumental scale of their construction, the pyramids, the temples, the colossal statues, speaks of a civilization that built for eternity, assuming a stable earth. Yet even they experienced tremors. References in ancient texts are scarce and often metaphorical, linking quakes to the chaos god Set or the grumbling of the underworld. However, archaeologists have found evidence of seismic stress in some structures, subtle fractures and displacements that suggest the earth did indeed occasionally grumble beneath the pharaoh's feet. Imagine the terrifying scene, the towering statues of Memnon, known for their singing at dawn due to temperature changes, suddenly groaning and swaying not with the morning sun, but with the hidden wrath of the earth itself, a chilling display of divine displeasure that would send a clear message to mortals. These were the forgotten scars, not carved in stone, but in the memory of a shaking earth, and the subsequent efforts to appease angry gods or rebuild fallen monuments. But the most dramatic ancient cataclysm with profound historical implications unfolded far from the Nile's calm banks, in the heart of the Aegean. We're talking about the fiery dawn that arguably brought an end to one of Europe's earliest great civilizations, the Minoans. Flourishing on the island of Crete, this sophisticated Bronze Age culture built sprawling, unfortified palaces like Knossos and Phaistos, filled with vibrant frescoes and intricate plumbing. Their power was derived from trade and maritime dominance, not military might, suggesting a long period of peace. Then came the geological sledgehammer. Around 1600 BCE, roughly 70 miles north of Crete, the volcanic island of Thera, known today as Santiri, exploded, one of the largest eruptions in human history. This wasn't just a volcano, it was an apocalyptic event. The blast dwarfed anything witnessed in recorded history, releasing energy equivalent to hundreds of atomic bombs. The eruption column shot miles into the stratosphere, raining ash across the entire Aegean and beyond. But before the ash fell, before the island itself ripped apart, came the seismic roar. Massive earthquakes would have preceded and accompanied the eruption, shaking Crete with unprecedented violence. Imagine the elegant Minoan palaces, built without deep foundations, suddenly swaying, cracking, and collapsing under the prolonged seismic assault. The iconic bull-leaping frescoes, the intricate drainage systems, the light wells, all would have been ripped apart, leaving a shattered landscape of what was once a vibrant civilization.
The seismic fury was just the overture. The true knockout blow came from the sea. The Thera eruption generated colossal tsunamis that would have slammed into Crete's northern coast with unimaginable force. Waves potentially hundreds of feet high would have scoured coastal settlements, wiping out harbors, ships, and agricultural lands. The very backbone of Minoan power, their trade fleet and fertile coastal plains, would have been annihilated. Imagine the horror as the sea, usually a source of bounty and connection, suddenly became a wall of water, roaring inland, sweeping away entire towns, burying fertile fields in salt and debris. Those who survived the initial wave would have been left with a devastated landscape, poisoned by ash, barren by salt, and plagued by aftershocks. The eruption of Thera didn't immediately extinguish Minoan civilization, but it delivered a crippling blow from which it never fully recovered. Trade networks collapsed, cities were abandoned, and the survivors, perhaps believing the gods had cursed their island, were left vulnerable. This catastrophic event is often cited as a major contributing factor to the Minoans' eventual decline, paving the way for the rise of the Mycenaean Greeks. Some scholars even link the cataclysm to the legend of Atlantis, a powerful island civilization swallowed by the sea. Whether true or not, Thera stands as a terrifying testament to an ancient cataclysm, an earthquake-fueled volcanic eruption that ripped apart not just an island, but the very fabric of an entire civilization, leaving scars that were eventually covered by ash and ocean, becoming a forgotten memory for millennia until modern archaeology began to uncover its devastating truth. Fast forward to ancient Greece, a land woven by myth and prone to seismic activity. The clash of tectonic plates beneath the Aegean Sea made earthquakes a frequent, if unpredictable, visitor. For the Greeks, earthquakes weren't just natural disasters. They were the angry stomps of Poseidon, the earth shaker, or a sign of divine displeasure from Zeus himself. These events often left deep and lasting scars, not just on the land, but on the social and political landscape. One of the most historically significant ancient Greek earthquakes struck Sparta in 464 BCE. This was a massive tremor, estimated to be around a magnitude 7.0, and it utterly devastated the heart of the Spartan city-state. Accounts from ancient historians like Thucydides describe a scene of unimaginable destruction. Almost all the buildings in Sparta were leveled, and the death toll was immense, potentially claiming tens of thousands of lives among the ruling Spartiates and the surrounding population. Imagine a city built on military discipline and rigid social order suddenly reduced to rubble, its famed barracks and training grounds shattered, its very foundations shaking. The immediate aftermath was pure chaos, but the long-term consequences were even more profound. The earthquake triggered a massive uprising among the Helots, the enslaved agricultural population of Laconia and Messenia, who saw the catastrophe as a sign of divine favor and an opportunity for freedom. This revolt, known as the Third Messenian War, lasted for years, severely straining Spartan military resources and forcing them to seek aid from other Greek city-states, most notably Athens. The subsequent rejection of Athenian aid by the Spartans, after Cimon led an army to assist them, sowed deep seeds of resentment and distrust between the two leading powers of Greece, directly contributing to the tensions that would eventually erupt into the devastating Peloponnesian War. So this wasn't just a natural disaster, it was a political earthquake, a forgotten scar on the earth that tore apart the fabric of Greek alliances and set the stage for decades of conflict. Other Greek cities too, like Corinth, Rhodes, and the coastal settlements of the Peloponnese, experienced their share of seismic destruction. Earthquakes often led to the collapse of temples, the destruction of agoras, and the disruption of trade routes. While less dramatic than Thera, these frequent tremors were a constant reminder of the unpredictable forces of nature, often rebuilt over, leaving subtle architectural clues of their devastating past. Imagine walking through the ruins of an ancient temple today, only to notice the slight shift in the column drums, the subtle crack in the marble that tells the story of a sudden, violent shake millennia ago, a scar that only the earth and careful eyes remember. The Roman Empire, vast and sprawling, stretched across some of the most seismically active regions of the ancient world. From the volcanic heart of Italy to the shifting Anatolian fault lines, earthquakes were a recurring, often devastating fact of life. Unlike the Greeks, who often attributed them to angry gods, the Romans, with their pragmatic approach, eventually sought to understand and build against these forces, though often with limited success. The scars left by Roman earthquakes were sometimes immediately visible, sometimes buried, and sometimes so consistently present that the cycle of destruction and rebuilding became part of a city's very identity. Perhaps the most famous Roman forgotten scar lies beneath the ash of Vesuvius. While the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 CE famously buried Pompeii and Herculaneum, it was not the first natural disaster to strike these bustling Campanian cities. 17 years earlier, in 62 CE, a powerful earthquake, estimated at around magnitude 7.0 or 7.1, rocked the region, causing widespread devastation. Temples, public buildings, and private homes in both Pompeii and Herculaneum were severely damaged or outright destroyed. Imagine the thriving commercial streets and elegant villas suddenly reduced to rubble, with residents fleeing in panic. Seneca the Younger, a Roman philosopher, described the widespread destruction and even the death of animals as a result. So, this wasn't just a natural disaster. It was a political earthquake, a forgotten scar on the earth that tore apart the fabric of Greek alliances and set the stage for decades of conflict.
It wasn't a gentle tremor. It was a cataclysm. The ground began to heave and roll violently, an immense seismic shock estimated to be between magnitude 8.5 and 9.0 on today's scale. Buildings, many already weakened by previous smaller quakes, swayed like drunken giants. The ornate stone facades of Lisbon's magnificent palaces, its bustling marketplaces, its multi-story tenements, some up to 5 or 6 floors tall, and most tragically, its packed churches, all began to collapse. Imagine the chaos, the deafening roar of falling masonry, the screams of thousands trapped beneath rubble, the suffocating dust cloud that instantly blotted out the morning sun. The shaking lasted an agonizing 3 to 6 minutes, long enough for the city to be largely reduced to rubble. Survivors stumbled out into the open, dazed, bleeding, and trying to comprehend the unimaginable destruction. But the earth wasn't finished. Many people, seeking refuge from the crumbling buildings, fled towards the Tagus River, believing the open waterfront would be safe. They saw the river's waters inexplicably recede, exposing the muddy seabed, littered with lost cargo and shipwrecks. Curious onlookers, perhaps thinking this was a miracle, walked onto the exposed riverbed. But what they were witnessing was not a miracle. It was the prelude to a far greater horror. Approximately 40 minutes after the initial quake, a colossal tsunami slammed into the city. The waters of the Atlantic, channeled by the river's estuary, rose into waves estimated to be 20 to 50 feet high. These monstrous walls of water surged inland, sweeping away everything in their path. The throngs of people gathered on the riverfront, the ships anchored in the harbor, some dragged miles inland, others capsized and shattered. and the remaining structures along the lower parts of the city. 3 successive waves ravaged Lisbon, extending far beyond the immediate waterfront, turning the once bustling port into a watery grave and an unrecognizable wasteland of debris and corpses. And still, the nightmare continued. The earthquake, with its violent shaking, had toppled thousands of candles in churches, overturned cooking fires, and shattered oil lamps. Within hours, these scattered ignition points coalesced into a raging firestorm. Fueled by fallen timbers, furniture, and human bodies, the flames consumed what little remained of Lisbon. The fires burned for 5 agonizing days, turning large sections of the city into a charred wasteland. The dense smoke and heat were so intense that even those who had survived the quake and tsunami were now forced to flee the city limits or risk incineration. The scale of destruction was almost unimaginable. An estimated 85% of Lisbon was destroyed. Grand palaces, libraries, hospitals, and nearly all the city's 35 major churches crumbled. Priceless works of art, historical archives, including detailed records of Vasco da Gama's voyages, and vast quantities of colonial gold and jewels were lost forever, either buried under rubble, swept out to sea, or melted in the inferno. The death toll was catastrophic, estimated to be between 10,000 and 100,000 people, though the lower end of that range is more commonly accepted today. Portugal, once a powerful colonial empire, suffered an economic and cultural blow from which it would take centuries to fully recover. But the Lisbon quake's impact extended far beyond the shattered streets of Portugal. It sent shockwaves through the intellectual heart of Europe, triggering what can only be described as a philosophical earthquake. The 18th century was the Age of Enlightenment, a time characterized by immense optimism and a burgeoning belief in human reason and progress. Central to this optimism was the philosophy of Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, who in the early 1700s had proposed the idea of the best of all possible worlds. This philosophical stance argued that because God is perfectly good, omnipotent, and omniscient, the universe he created must, by definition, be the best possible one. All evil and suffering must therefore serve a greater purpose, even if humans couldn't comprehend it. It was a comforting, rational framework for a world increasingly seeking logical explanations for everything. But the Lisbon quake shattered this comforting worldview. How could such seemingly random, immense, and meaningless suffering, the death of thousands, regardless of piety or sin, the destruction of a beautiful, devout city, fit into the best of all possible worlds? It exposed a terrifying vulnerability, a world where divine benevolence seemed utterly absent. The most famous response came from the French philosopher and writer Voltaire. Already a sharp critic of uncritical optimism, Voltaire was profoundly affected by the Lisbon's catastrophe. He immediately published his Poème sur le désastre de Lisbonne, Poem on the Lisbon Disaster, in 1756, a direct and scathing attack on Leibniz's philosophy. In the poem, he questions how a benevolent God could permit such horror, rejecting the idea that suffering is always part of a greater good. He wrote famously, "Will you say, in this heap of victims found, God has avenged, the scale has weighed the ground?" He argued that such attempts to rationalize suffering were an insult to both human pain and divine justice.
But Voltaire didn't stop there. He followed up with his masterpiece of satire, Candide, or Optimism, also published in 1759. The novel directly parodies Leibniz's philosophy through the character of Dr. Pangloss, Candide's tutor, who, even after surviving unimaginable atrocities, insists that all is for the best in this best of all possible worlds. The Lisbon earthquake is a pivotal event in Candide's journey, forcing the naive protagonist to confront unadulterated evil and suffering that cannot be rationally justified. Voltaire's work forced Europe to grapple with the uncomfortable truth that nature, and perhaps God, were not always benevolent or understandable, challenging the very core of Enlightenment optimism. Not all Enlightenment thinkers agreed with Voltaire's condemnation of optimism. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, for example, responded to Voltaire in his Letter on Providence, 1756. Rousseau argued that the true fault lay not with God or nature, but with humanity's own choices. He contended that if humans had not concentrated so many people into densely packed, multi-story cities, the death toll from the earthquake would have been far lower. If people lived more simply, scattered across the land, in natural dwellings, a tremor would cause minimal damage. For Rousseau, the Lisbon disaster was a consequence of human hubris and artificiality, not divine malevolence. This perspective, though a counterpoint to Voltaire's, also pushed philosophical boundaries, forcing reflection on the relationship between human society and the natural world. Theologically, the Lisbon quake ignited fierce debates. Was it divine punishment for Lisbon's sins? If so, why did more sinful cities like Paris or London remain untouched? And why did so many devout worshippers die inside the very churches where they sought salvation? These questions chipped away at traditional interpretations of divine intervention. While some clung to the divine punishment narrative, the sheer randomness and scale of the destruction pushed many towards a more deistic view of God, a God who created the universe and its laws, but did not constantly interfere with its workings. The problem of evil, of how a good God could permit suffering, became a central and urgent question for philosophers and theologians alike. Beyond philosophy and theology, the Lisbon quake had a profound and lasting impact on practical matters, particularly disaster response and urban planning. Credit for this largely goes to Sebastião José de Carvalho e Melo, the Marquis of Pombal, then Portugal's prime minister. His response to the catastrophe was remarkably pragmatic and scientific for its time. When asked what should be done, he famously replied, "Bury the dead and feed the living." Pombal immediately dispatched teams to assess the damage, gather bodies, and distribute aid. Crucially, he ordered a survey to be conducted throughout the country, asking direct questions about the earthquake. How many shocks were felt? What was their duration? What kind of buildings fell? Did any objects and houses move? Did wells or springs change levels? These questions, though rudimentary by modern standards, represent one of the first known scientific inquiries into the effects of an earthquake, laying a nascent foundation for modern seismology. More impressively, Pombal oversaw the complete rebuilding of Lisbon, rejecting grand, ornate designs in favor of practicality and resilience. He decreed that Lisbon would be rebuilt on a rational grid plan, with wider, straighter streets, uniform building heights, and, most significantly, with earthquake-resistant construction. This new architectural style, now known as Pombaline, incorporated a flexible wooden framework, the Pombaline cage or Gaiola Umbilina, within the masonry walls. This innovative design allowed buildings to sway and absorb seismic energy rather than crumbling. It was a revolutionary approach to urban planning, making Lisbon one of the first deliberately earthquake-proof cities in the world. Pombal's authoritarian yet effective leadership transformed Lisbon from rubble into a modern, resilient capital. The Lisbon quake, therefore, birthed not just philosophical and theological crises, but also modern urban planning and disaster preparedness, recognizing that humanity could and must learn to live with a restless planet. The legacy of the Lisbon quake of 1755 is immense. It marked a turning point in European thought, challenging the easy optimism of the Enlightenment and forcing a more sober reflection on humanity's place in a universe that could, at any moment, unleash terrifying, seemingly arbitrary destruction. It shifted philosophical debates, spurred scientific inquiry, and inspired new approaches to building and managing cities. It was a moment when the earth truly shook, and in doing so, forever changed the way humanity looked at itself, its gods, and the ground beneath its feet. And for many, the story of the Earth's deadliest tremors was just beginning. The medieval period, as we've seen, was a time when the Earth's shivers were often interpreted as divine displeasure, a monstrous warning or the rumblings of cosmic forces. Fear, folklore, and fervent prayer were the primary responses. But as Europe began to awaken from the so-called Dark Ages, an intellectual dawn began to spread across the continent. The Renaissance rekindled a thirst for knowledge, and the Enlightenment championed reason, observation, and empirical inquiry above all else. Slowly, painstakingly, humanity began to shift its gaze from the heavens to the very ground beneath its feet, seeking natural explanations for these terrifying tremors. This wasn't an overnight change. For centuries, the old ways of thinking held sway. Even brilliant minds like Leonardo da Vinci, while sketching incredible inventions, still theorized about earthquakes as the earth breathing or giant fish swimming underground. It was a slow, intellectual tectonic shift, mirroring the very forces it sought to understand. The key was a growing philosophical insistence that natural phenomena had natural causes, and that these causes could be observed, measured, and understood rather than merely appeased. One pivotal moment, a real jolt to the scientific consciousness, was the catastrophic Lisbon earthquake of 1755. While we'll dive deeper into that specific cataclysm later, its intellectual aftershocks were immense. It wasn't just a city that crumbled, it was a philosophical framework. The sheer, unexplainable devastation, striking a devoutly Catholic city on a holy day, forced thinkers across Europe to confront the terrifying randomness of natural disaster. It pushed philosophers and nascent scientists to seek answers beyond divine retribution or cosmic whims. How could a benevolent God allow such indiscriminate destruction? Perhaps they began to wonder it wasn't God at all. Perhaps it was the earth itself, operating by its own knowable, if terrifying, laws.
This shift in perception opened the door for true scientific inquiry. One of the earliest and most profound figures in this nascent field was John Michell, an English clergyman and natural philosopher from the mid-18th century. Often hailed as the father of seismology, Michell was a polymath, a geologist, astronomer, and physicist. His genius lay not just in observation, but in conceptualization. He didn't just see the ground shake, he imagined why and how. In the wake of the Lisbon earthquake, Michell was among the first to systematically collect accounts and data, treating the event not as a miracle or a curse, but as a scientific problem. He meticulously gathered reports from sailors, merchants, and diplomats across Europe and beyond, noting the precise times the shaking began, its duration, and its felt intensity. His groundbreaking contribution, published in 1760, was to propose that earthquakes were not caused by subterranean explosions or winds trapped in caverns, the prevailing Aristotelian view. Instead, he argued, they were generated by shifting masses of rock deep beneath the Earth's surface. This was a revolutionary idea. Michell posited that these shifts would generate waves, much like ripples spreading across water, but through solid rock. He even suggested that the speed and direction of these waves could be used to pinpoint the origin of the earthquake. This concept of seismic waves propagating through the Earth, linked to the elasticity of the Earth's materials, was a monumental leap forward. He essentially laid the theoretical groundwork for understanding earthquakes as mechanical processes, moving seismology from mystical speculation to the realm of physics. Following Michell, The late 18th and early 19th centuries saw a growing appetite for empirical data. Catastrophes like the Great Earthquake of Calabria in 1783, Italy, further fueled this drive. Though less philosophically impactful than Lisbon, Calabria spurred intense scientific study. Geologists like Deodat de Dolamy meticulously mapped the geological effects, observing landslips, fissures, and changes in water courses. These detailed field observations highlighted the Earth's destructive power and the complex ways it reshaped the landscape, further cementing the idea that earthquakes were geological events, not merely random acts of nature. However, the problem remained. How do you measure something as fleeting and violent as an earthquake? Early instruments were rudimentary, often more curiosities than scientific tools. Some involved simple bowls of mercury, observing the ripples caused by distant tremors. Others used pendulums, the direction of their swing indicating the direction of shaking. These were qualitative at best, unable to record the precise timing, amplitude, or duration of ground motion. The desire for quantitative data was clear, but the technology was still catching up. The mid-19th century marked a significant turning point with the emergence of true seismometers. Luigi Palmieri, an Italian physicist and meteorologist, made a notable contribution in the 1850s. He invented an electromagnetic seismograph that used a series of mercury-filled U-tubes to detect and record ground motion. Each tube had an electrical contact at either end, and when the mercury was displaced by shaking, it completed a circuit, ringing a bell and activating a clockwork mechanism that recorded the time. While still primitive by modern standards, Palmieri's device was one of the first to attempt to record not just the presence, but also the direction, intensity, and duration of an earthquake, pushing seismology further into the realm of precise measurement. But it was Robert Mollett, an Irish civil engineer, who truly revolutionized observational seismology in the 1850s and 1860s. Mollett was driven by a practical desire to understand how buildings could withstand earthquakes. He moved beyond mere observation, pioneering what could be called experimental seismology. In a series of remarkable experiments, he used explosives to simulate miniature earthquakes, studying how the vibrations propagated through different types of ground. He observed the effects of these artificial tremors on structures, attempting to quantify the forces involved. This was an unprecedented step, bringing controlled experimentation to the study of a natural phenomenon that had historically defied such attempts. Mollett also coined several terms still used in seismology today, including seismic focus, later refined into hypocenter, the point of origin within the Earth, and epicenter, the point on the surface directly above the focus. His magnum opus, a 2-volume report on the Great Neapolitan Earthquake of 1857 in southern Italy, was a landmark in disaster investigation. He traveled to the devastated region, meticulously documenting the damage to buildings and the landscape, creating detailed maps that showed varying degrees of destruction. His isoseismal maps, which depicted lines of equal seismic intensity, laid the foundation for modern earthquake intensity scales. Mollett's work transformed seismology from a theoretical pursuit to a rigorous empirical science grounded in meticulous field observation and quantitative analysis. As the 19th century drew to a close, a growing understanding of Earth's dynamic nature began to take shape. The planet was no longer seen as a static platform, but as a restless, living entity, constantly shifting and evolving. This conceptual breakthrough laid the way for the establishment of seismic observatories and a global network of monitoring stations. A key figure in this development was John Milne, an English geologist and mining engineer. His experiences in Japan proved pivotal. Japan, a highly seismic country, was a constant reminder of the Earth's unpredictable power. Milne, initially sent to Japan in the 1870s to teach mining at the Imperial College of Engineering in Tokyo, soon became fascinated by the frequent tremors. He experienced numerous earthquakes himself, which spurred his dedication to understanding them.
In the 1880s, Milne developed a groundbreaking horizontal pendulum seismograph. Unlike earlier instruments that could only detect local quakes, Milne's new design was far more sensitive, capable of recording ground motions from distant earthquakes thousands of miles away. This was a critical innovation. For the first time, scientists could listen to the Earth's pulse from across continents, detecting major seismic events anywhere on the globe. Milne didn't stop there. He championed the idea of a global network of seismograph stations. Working tirelessly, he established a system where observatories across the British Empire and beyond would send their seismic data to a central processing hub. This collaborative effort led to the formation of the International Seismological Association, forerunner of today's International Seismological Center, facilitating the systematic collection and exchange of earthquake data worldwide. Milne's work in Japan and his vision for global monitoring effectively launched modern global seismology, transforming it into an international scientific endeavor. By the early 20th century, the awakening was complete. Humanity's relationship with the Earth had fundamentally changed. Earthquakes were no longer perceived primarily as divine wrath or inexplicable terrors. They were understood as complex natural phenomena, driven by immense forces deep within a dynamic planet. The shift from fear to understanding, from folklore to rigorous science, had laid the groundwork for future discoveries, from the concept of plate tectonics to sophisticated early warning systems. The Earth had found its pulse, and humanity, for the first time, had begun to listen with instruments, data, and a new scientific understanding. Now, let's travel from the ancient echoes of the Earth to a different kind of awakening, one born from fire and rubble in the dawn of the 20th century. We're heading to San Francisco, a city that, before 1906, shimmered with a golden glow, convinced of its own invincibility. Imagine San Francisco at the turn of the century. It was a boomtown, built on gold rush dreams and a fierce, optimistic spirit. Its hills were crowned with Victorian mansions, cable cars clanged up and down bustling streets, and its harbor teemed with ships from across the Pacific. This was a city that believed in progress, in opportunity, and in its own manifest destiny. Beneath its vibrant facade, however, lay a terrifying secret. It sat directly atop the infamous San Andreas Fault, one of the longest and most active strike-slip faults in the world. But in the exuberance of the era, few paid heed to the Earth's quiet rumblings, interpreting any tremors as minor inconveniences rather than grave warnings. The city was built largely on landfill, extending into the bay, an area particularly vulnerable to seismic liquefaction. Despite a history of smaller quakes, San Francisco was in essence a tinderbox of wood and gas lines waiting for a spark. Its citizens lived with a sense of boundless confidence, convinced that whatever trials came, San Francisco would endure, perhaps even emerge stronger. Little did they know, the Earth was about to test that belief in the most brutal way imaginable. The morning of April 18, 1906, dawned like any other. At 5:12 a.m., most of San Francisco was still asleep, dreaming of fortunes, new beginnings, or simply the next day's work. But then the dreams shattered. Without warning, the Earth unleashed a tremendous roar, a sound witnesses described as a terrible grinding or the roar of 1,000 lions. The initial shockwave struck with unimaginable force, violently shaking the city for nearly a minute, followed by an even more intense second shock a few seconds later. This wasn't just a tremor, it was a violent, convulsive heave, as if the planet itself was trying to throw the city off its back. The estimated magnitude was later calculated to be around 7.9, a colossal force by any measure. Buildings swayed, groaned, and then collapsed like houses of cards. Victorian homes, with their elaborate cornices and tall, slender structures, were particularly vulnerable. Chimneys toppled, brick facades crumbled, and entire blocks of masonry buildings disintegrated into clouds of dust and rubble. Streets buckled and cracked, streetcar tracks twisted into grotesque knots, and water mains burst, sending geysers into the chaos. Imagine being jolted awake by the violent rocking of your bed, unable to stand as plaster rained down, glass shattered, and the very structure of your home groaned around you. Panic erupted. People stumbled into the streets in their nightclothes, dazed and disoriented, only to find a landscape transformed into a scene of apocalyptic devastation. The initial quake lasted only 45 to 60 seconds, but in that terrifying minute, San Francisco was brought to its knees, its infrastructure shattered, its sense of security utterly annihilated. And this was just the beginning. The ground might have stopped shaking, but the real destroyer was yet to come. As terrifying as the initial earthquake was, it was merely the overture to a far greater catastrophe. Within minutes of the ground settling, the fires began. They weren't just isolated blazes, they were hundreds of separate fires igniting simultaneously across the city, sparked by broken gas lines, overturned kerosene lamps, and collapsed chimneys scattering live coals onto wooden roofs and floors. San Francisco, with its dense concentration of wooden buildings, was a perfect fuel source. The city's fire chief, Dennis Sullivan, a brilliant and courageous leader, was tragically killed in the initial quake when his firehouse collapsed on him. His loss crippled the city's ability to respond effectively at the very moment it was most needed. Imagine the horror. You've survived the shaking, stumbled into the street, and now, against the pre-dawn sky, you see plumes of smoke rising from every direction. The fires, fanned by prevailing winds, began to merge, forming vast, unstoppable infernos that consumed block after block. Firefighters, disorganized and leaderless, quickly found their efforts futile. Water mains had ruptured in the quake, leaving hydrants dry and rendering fire hoses useless. Panic gave way to desperate ingenuity. The Army, under the command of Brigadier General Frederick Funston, took control, attempting to create fire breaks by dynamiting entire blocks of buildings. The idea was to starve the fires of fuel, but with limited experience and an excess of zeal, the dynamiting often did more harm than good, spreading new fires and debris rather than containing existing ones. The explosions added to the chaos, sounding like a continuous battle raging across the city. For 3 harrowing days and nights, San Francisco burned. The sky glowed with an apocalyptic orange hue, visible for miles, as the city's heart was reduced to a desolate wasteland of smoldering ruins. The heat was so intense it melted steel and turned brick into dust. People fled in droves, carrying what few possessions they could, pushing elderly relatives in wheelbarrows, guiding bewildered children through the smoke-filled streets. Families became separated in the desperate scramble for safety. The fires devoured homes, businesses, and public buildings indiscriminately, erasing landmarks and entire neighborhoods from the map. When the last embers finally died out, roughly 25,000 buildings had been destroyed, covering nearly 500 city blocks. The loss from fire far outstripped the damage from the earthquake itself, making it clear that urban design and disaster response were just as critical as geological forces in determining a catastrophe's true impact. The scale of the disaster was almost unimaginable. Approximately 80% of San Francisco lay in ruins, a desolate landscape of ash and twisted metal. The official death toll was initially reported as around 700, but modern estimates, accounting for unreported deaths in immigrant communities and the utterly vaporized, place the figure closer to 3,000, possibly more. Hundreds of thousands were left homeless, transformed overnight into refugees in their own city. Imagine a metropolis turned into a vast encampment, its parks and open spaces teeming with makeshift tent cities as survivors huddled together, sharing what little food and water could be found. Martial law was declared,
and soldiers patrolled the streets, sometimes with controversial shoot-to-kill orders for looters, adding another layer of fear and tension. Despite the chaos, the spirit of resilience, so characteristic of San Francisco, quickly emerged. Within days, relief efforts poured in from across the nation and the world. Food, clothing, and medical supplies arrived by train and ship, distributed to the displaced population. Improvised soup kitchens fed thousands, and emergency services worked tirelessly to restore order and sanitation. The sense of collective suffering fostered an immediate, if temporary, breakdown of social barriers as people from all walks of life shared the same plight. Even as the embers still smoldered, the talk wasn't of abandonment, but of rebuilding. "San Francisco will rise again," became the rallying cry, plastered on makeshift signs and whispered among the ruins. The immediate aftermath was a testament to human endurance, but the true significance of the 1906 quake extended far beyond the physical destruction and the immediate human response. It would profoundly reshape our understanding of the Earth itself. For centuries, earthquakes had largely been viewed through a lens of divine retribution or inexplicable natural fury. Ancient civilizations attributed them to angry gods, medieval Europeans to the stirrings of subterranean monsters. Even into the 19th century, scientific understanding remained rudimentary, often focusing on vague theories of earth vapors or internal geological convulsions without a clear mechanism. The 1906 San Francisco earthquake, however, struck at the dawn of a new scientific era, forcing a radical shift in perception from spiritual to geological, from folklore to empirical observation. This was the moment geology began to truly awaken to the Earth's pulse. Immediately after the quake, a dedicated team of geologists, led by Dr. Andrew Lawson of the University of California, Berkeley, was dispatched to investigate. Their mandate was clear: understand what had happened. Lawson and his colleagues meticulously surveyed the rupture, walking the hundreds of miles of visible surface trace, documenting the lateral displacement of roads, fences, and even entire orchards. What they found was astonishingly precise. The ground on one side of the fault had moved horizontally relative to the other side, sometimes by as much as 20 feet. This wasn't just random shaking, it was a massive, systematic rupture along a specific geological feature. Their groundbreaking report, published in 1908 and famously known as the Lawson Report, became a landmark in the history of seismology. It laid out, in meticulous detail, the evidence for what would become known as the elastic rebound theory. Proposed earlier by Harry Fielding Reid after studying the 1906 event, this theory fundamentally transformed our understanding of earthquakes. It posited that stresses gradually build up in the Earth's crust along fault lines, deforming the rocks like a stretched rubber band. When the accumulated stress exceeds the strength of the rocks, the fault suddenly ruptures, allowing the strained rock to snap back to its original undeformed shape, releasing a tremendous amount of energy in the form of seismic waves. Imagine slowly bending a stick until it breaks with a sudden crack. The crack is the earthquake, and the energy released is the elastic rebound.
The Lawson Report not only provided definitive proof of this mechanism, but also meticulously mapped the full extent of the San Andreas Fault, establishing it as a primary geological feature responsible for California's seismic activity. This was a monumental leap, shifting the explanation of earthquakes from a mysterious, unpredictable force to a predictable, understandable geological process, driven by the slow, relentless movement of tectonic plates. The San Francisco quake wasn't just a disaster, it was a colossal natural experiment that provided the empirical data needed to solidify a revolutionary scientific theory, forever changing how humanity viewed the ground beneath its feet. The San Francisco earthquake of 1906 was not just a local tragedy, it was the seismic shock that jolted American science into the modern era of seismology. Before this event, geological studies in the United States were relatively nascent, and the understanding of earthquakes was still largely theoretical, or derived from European observations. The sheer scale and devastating impact of the 1906 quake, coupled with the meticulous scientific investigation that followed, provided an undeniable impetus for the formalization and advancement of seismological research in the U.S. The immediate aftermath saw an unprecedented mobilization of scientific resources. The U.S. Geological Survey and academic institutions, particularly those in California, recognized the urgent need for systematic study. The Lawson Report, as discussed, became the foundational text, but its impact extended beyond its immediate findings. It spurred the establishment of dedicated seismological observatories, the deployment of new, more sensitive seismographs, and the training of a new generation of geophysicists. The data collected from the 1906 rupture became the benchmark against which future seismic events would be measured and understood. Furthermore, the quake highlighted the critical need for an organized national approach to earthquake research. It illuminated the interconnectedness of geology, engineering, and public safety. Scientists began to advocate for better building codes, the study of soil liquefaction, and the development of early warning systems. The lessons learned from San Francisco directly influenced future urban planning, leading to a greater awareness of seismic hazards in California and beyond. While other quakes had contributed to understanding, 1906 provided the definitive, undeniable proof that major faults were active, dynamic features requiring constant scientific vigilance. It catalyzed a shift from simply recording tremors to actively studying their underlying mechanisms, predicting their potential impacts, and mitigating their effects through informed policy and resilient construction. In essence, the fiery dawn over San Francisco also marked the awakening of American seismology, transforming it from a nascent field into a vital discipline dedicated to understanding and living with a restless planet. Out of the ashes and rubble of 1906, San Francisco quite literally rose again, but it rebuilt with a new, sober understanding of the Earth's immense power. The quake forced a fundamental reevaluation of urban planning, architectural design, and disaster preparedness in seismic zones. This wasn't just about constructing new buildings, it was about building a more resilient city, incorporating the harsh lessons learned from the catastrophe. One of the most immediate and profound impacts was on building codes. Engineers and architects, now armed with the elastic rebound theory and a first-hand understanding of ground motion and fire spread, began to implement more rigorous standards. Wooden structures, while still common, were designed with greater flexibility and stronger foundations. Masonry buildings, particularly those susceptible to collapse, were reinforced with steel. The importance of fireproofing materials and redundant water supply systems became paramount. The focus shifted from simply building upward to building smarter and safer. While subsequent quakes like Long Beach in 1933 or Northridge in 1994 would continue to refine these codes, 1906 was the critical turning point, cementing seismic resistance as a non-negotiable aspect of construction in California. Beyond architecture, the quake fostered a new public consciousness about seismic risk. The San Andreas Fault, once an abstract geological feature, became a household name, its presence acknowledged in everyday life. Californians, particularly in the Bay Area, developed a unique blend of fatalism and preparedness. They knew the big one could strike again, but they also learned to live with that knowledge, incorporating drills, emergency kits, and a general awareness of their surroundings. This awareness extended to infrastructure, leading to investments in retrofitting bridges, highways, and public utilities to withstand future shaking. It spurred the development of robust emergency management protocols and interagency cooperation. But perhaps the most enduring impact was psychological. San Francisco's resilience in the face of such utter destruction became a legendary tale of human spirit. The city was rebuilt with remarkable speed and an even greater sense of civic pride. It embraced its identity as a city on the fault line, a place where nature's raw power met human ingenuity and stubborn refusal to be defeated. The scars of 1906, though largely covered by new construction, remain etched in the city's memory, a constant reminder of the fiery dawn that reshaped not just its skyline,
but its understanding of its place on a restless planet.
The San Francisco earthquake of 1906 was not just a destructive event, it was a critical scientific revelation that cemented the existence and behavior of the San Andreas Fault in the geological consciousness. Before 1906, the understanding of large-scale fault systems and their role in generating earthquakes was nascent. Geologists knew of linear features in the landscape, but the concept of a single, continuous fault extending for hundreds of miles, capable of rupturing catastrophically, was not widely accepted or fully understood. The ground rupture in 1906, spanning over 296 miles or 476 kilometers from Shelter Cove in Humboldt County to San Juan Bautista in San Benito County, provided undeniable visual evidence of the San Andreas Fault's immense scale and activity. Roads, fences, stream beds, and even entire rows of trees were laterally offset by up to 20 feet or 6 meters. This horizontal displacement was a direct manifestation of the fault's strike-slip motion, confirming it as a fundamental boundary between the Pacific and North American tectonic plates. The painstaking survey work by Andrew Lawson and his team, meticulously mapping this rupture, transformed the San Andreas from a suspected feature into a definitive, well-documented geological boundary. Their 1908 report not only validated the elastic rebound theory, but also provided the first comprehensive mapping of the fault, identifying its segments and understanding how strain accumulates along its length. It demonstrated that accumulated stress, rather than simply releasing in small tremors, could suddenly be unleashed in a massive, single event affecting a vast area. This event provided compelling empirical data that would later be integrated into the broader theory of plate tectonics in the mid-20th century. The San Andreas became a textbook example of a transformed plate boundary, where two massive crustal plates grind past each other horizontally. Its study after 1906 laid the groundwork for understanding seismic cycles, recurrence intervals, and the concept of seismic gaps, or segments of a fault that haven't ruptured in a long time and are therefore considered more likely to do so in the future. In essence, the 1906 San Francisco earthquake was the geological Rosetta Stone for the San Andreas Fault. It forced scientists and the public alike to acknowledge the fault's terrifying potential, leading to decades of ongoing research that continues to unravel its complexities. It fundamentally reshaped our understanding of California's seismic landscape, turning a calamitous natural event into a profound scientific lesson that continues to inform earthquake preparedness and risk mitigation to this day. The city might have been destroyed, but our understanding of its restless planet was forged in the fire. Now, let's journey across the Pacific to a land constantly reminding humanity of the Earth's restless pulse, Japan. Situated directly on the infamous Ring of Fire, a horseshoe-shaped belt of seismic activity that encircles the Pacific Ocean, Japan is a nation built on active fault lines, a place where the ground beneath your feet truly never stands still. For centuries, its people have lived with the threat of tremors, tsunamis, and volcanic eruptions, weaving these natural phenomena into their folklore, their architecture, and their very identity. But even a nation accustomed to the Earth's shivers can be caught off guard by a cataclysm of unimaginable scale. Imagine Japan in the early 20th century. Tokyo and Yokohama were bustling, rapidly modernizing metropolises, vibrant hubs of industry, commerce, and culture. Tokyo, the sprawling capital, was a fascinating blend of old and new. Traditional wooden homes nestled beside nascent brick and steel structures, a city racing to catch up with Western industrialization. Yokohama, its port city, was a gateway to the world, a melting pot of international trade and influences. But both cities shared a profound vulnerability. Despite Japan's long history of earthquakes, much of their urban fabric was still dangerously fragile. Many buildings, particularly residential ones, were constructed from wood and heavy tile roofs, and vast districts were densely packed, ripe for a conflagration. Beneath the veneer of modernization and optimism, a tinderbox lay waiting. A sense of false security, born from the absence of a truly massive quake in recent memory, lulled many into underestimating the immense, terrifying power slumbering beneath their feet. The stage was set for an unparalleled disaster. Then came the morning of September 1st, 1923. It was a Saturday, a day just before noon, 11:58 a.m., a time when many families were preparing lunch. Charcoal braziers were lit, cooking fires burned, and ovens were warming across the Kanto plain. The air was heavy with the late summer humidity, and a typhoon was brewing out at sea, its distant winds already beginning to stir. Life, in its ordinary rhythm, was about to be violently interrupted. Without warning, the earth unleashed a tremendous, sustained roar. What began as a rumble quickly escalated into a violent, convulsive heave, ripping through the ground with an estimated magnitude of 7.9. Witnesses described the initial jolt as feeling like an enormous fist had slammed into the planet, followed by a prolonged, terrifying shaking that lasted for an agonizing 4 to 10 minutes. Imagine standing or trying to stand as the very ground beneath you liquefied, turning solid earth into a quivering, unstable jelly. Buildings, especially those built on landfill near the coast or river deltas, swayed violently, their foundations losing all integrity. Houses groaned, wood splintered, and brick walls exploded outward as if struck by invisible cannonballs. Within seconds, the densely packed wooden homes across Tokyo and Yokohama began to collapse like dominoes, crushing thousands beneath their heavy tile roofs. Brick buildings, less flexible than wood, fared even worse, disintegrating into piles of rubble. Bridges twisted and buckled, roads cracked open, and railway tracks warped into grotesque, unusable shapes. In Yokohama, the massive shock caused a tsunami to surge through the harbor, sweeping away ships and drowning those caught unawares along the waterfront. The initial devastation was immense, claiming tens of thousands of lives in mere minutes. But as terrifying as the ground motion was, it was only the prelude. The true destroyer, far more insidious and relentless, was just beginning its fiery reign. As the ground finally settled, an even greater horror began to unfold. Fire. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of small fires erupted simultaneously across the devastated cities, sparked by overturned charcoal braziers, broken gas lines, toppled cooking stoves, and damaged electrical wires. The wooden debris from collapsed buildings provided abundant fuel, and the gusting winds from the approaching typhoon, now fanning the flames, turned isolated blazes into raging infernos. Within hours, these disparate fires began to merge, forming vast, unstoppable firestorms that consumed entire districts. The heat was so intense, it created its own wind, sucking oxygen from the surrounding air and generating terrifying phenomena known as fire whirls or dragon twists, tornadoes of flame that spun through the streets, carrying burning debris and engulfing everything in their path. Imagine watching a wall of fire, hundreds of feet high, roaring towards you, accelerating as it consumed everything in its path, throwing off smaller, spinning columns of pure flame. The city's infrastructure, already shattered by the quake, was helpless. Water mains had burst in countless locations, leaving firefighters with no water pressure, their hoses useless against the rapidly spreading conflagration. The narrow streets, choked with rubble and fleeing survivors, became impassable, trapping countless individuals. Communication lines were down, disorganizing response efforts and leaving desperate citizens with no information, only the terrifying visual of a city burning around them. One of the most horrific single tragedies occurred at the Hifukusho Atto, a former clothing depot in Tokyo. Approximately 38,000 people, fleeing the flames, sought refuge in its large open concrete courtyard, believing it to be a safe haven. They huddled together for hours, surrounded by their few salvaged possessions, as the inferno storm raged around them. But the inferno generated an unimaginable heat, and a massive fire whirl descended directly upon the depot, turning the packed courtyard into a human inferno. In a matter of minutes, nearly all 38,000 perished, incinerated by the superheated winds and flames. It remains one of the deadliest single incidents in any natural disaster in recorded history. For 2 relentless days and nights, Tokyo and Yokohama burned. The sky glowed with an apocalyptic orange, visible for hundreds of miles, as the cities were reduced to a desolate wasteland of ash, twisted metal, and smoldering ruins. The fires consumed everything indiscriminately: homes, businesses, schools, temples, and historical landmarks. When the last embers finally died out, roughly 57% of Tokyo and 90% of Yokohama lay in ruins. The total death toll from the combined earthquake and fires was staggering, officially reported at around 105,000, though many historians believe the true number was closer to 140,000 to 200,000, with hundreds of thousands more injured and rendered homeless. It was an unparalleled national catastrophe. The immediate aftermath was pure, desperate chaos. Hundreds of thousands of survivors, dazed and disoriented, stumbled through the smoking ruins, searching for lost loved ones, food, and water. Parks, schoolyards, and any open space became makeshift refugee camps, teeming with desperate people huddling together, wrapped in blankets or whatever scraps of cloth they could find. Food and water became critically scarce, leading to desperate scrambles for supplies. Martial law was immediately declared, and soldiers patrolled the streets, initially to maintain order and distribute aid. However, the devastation quickly ignited a dark and horrifying chapter of misinformation, fear, and xenophobia. Rumors, fueled by panic and pre-existing prejudices, spread like wildfire across the devastated Kanto region. Whispers began that Koreans, a minority group already facing discrimination and resentment in Japan, were poisoning wells, setting new fires, and looting. These baseless rumors quickly escalated into widespread violence. Self-proclaimed vigilante groups, often armed with makeshift weapons, formed throughout the affected areas, setting up checkpoints and attacking anyone they suspected of being Korean, Chinese, or even Japanese socialists. Tragically, thousands of innocent Koreans, Chinese, and other perceived outsiders were brutally murdered in mass massacres, carried out by mobs, sometimes with the complicity or inaction of local police and military units. This horrific episode remains a stark reminder of how quickly disaster and fear can erode social order and unleash the darkest aspects of human prejudice. Despite this dark internal turmoil, international aid poured in from around the world. The United States, Great Britain, China, and many other nations swiftly dispatched ships laden with food, medicine, and building materials. The sheer scale of the global humanitarian response underscored the immense sympathy felt for Japan in its hour of unprecedented need. Out of the ashes and rubble of 1923, Japan emerged with a grim determination to rebuild, but not just to rebuild what was lost. The Great Kanto earthquake and its devastating fires served as a brutal, unforgettable lesson, fundamentally reshaping the nation's approach to urban planning, architecture, and disaster preparedness. This wasn't merely about reconstruction, it was about building a more resilient, safer Japan.
One of the most immediate and profound impacts was a radical shift in urban planning and building codes. The old, vulnerable wooden structures that had fueled the firestorms were gradually replaced. New construction emphasized fire-resistant materials like steel and reinforced concrete. Building regulations were drastically tightened, incorporating advanced seismic resistance principles derived from a newfound understanding of earthquake forces. Engineers and architects learned to design structures that could sway and absorb seismic energy rather than rigidly resisting it and collapsing. While Tokyo and Yokohama would continue to experience earthquakes, the lessons from 1923 meant that future tremors would encounter a far more resilient urban landscape. Beyond physical infrastructure, the catastrophe catalyzed a national awakening to disaster preparedness. The importance of early warning systems, emergency drills, and public awareness campaigns became paramount. The government established research institutions dedicated to seismology and disaster mitigation, pioneering studies into earthquake prediction and response. Today, Japan is renowned globally for its advanced earthquake early warning systems, its meticulously organized disaster drills, and a public consciousness deeply ingrained with preparedness protocols. Children are taught from a young age how to react during an earthquake, and emergency kits are a common household item. Crucially, the Kanto devastation also offered bitter social lessons. The horrific massacres of Koreans and others highlighted the immense dangers of xenophobia, rumor, and unchecked mob violence during times of crisis. While it took many decades, this dark episode contributed to a long-term, painful reevaluation of social justice and the importance of verified information, even if it was a lesson slowly and painfully absorbed over generations. The Great Kanto earthquake of 1923 was a scar on the nation, a cataclysm that ripped through its very fabric. But it was also a crucible, forging a new era of resilience and understanding. Japan learned at an immense cost to live not just with a restless planet, but to adapt to it, building a society designed not to defy nature, but to endure its most tremendous roars. The memory of 1923, though painful, continues to echo, a constant reminder of the lessons learned and the unwavering spirit of a nation that always rises again, smarter and stronger from the dust and the flames. Now, let's shift our gaze to a place where the Earth's pulse beats with an almost unimaginable intensity. A nation stretched thin along the very edge of a colossal geological collision. Chile. This long, slender South American country, clinging precariously to the Pacific Ring of Fire, is no stranger to the Earth's tremors. It sits atop the Nazca Plate, which is relentlessly diving beneath the South American plate, a process known as subduction. This titanic geological dance creates immense stress, constantly building up over centuries, only to be released in bursts of terrifying energy. Chile, therefore, has a history etched in seismic scars, a land accustomed to the ground beneath its feet rumbling. But in 1960, the Earth didn't just rumble, it roared. It unleashed a cataclysm that would redefine our understanding of planetary power. A seismic event so immense it remains the largest ever recorded. A tremendous roar that echoed not just across a nation, but across an entire ocean. Imagine waking on a quiet Sunday afternoon, May 22, 1960, in Valdivia, a picturesque city in southern Chile. Life is calm, perhaps a family meal is winding down, or children are playing in the streets. There have been tremors in the days leading up to this, a series of significant foreshocks, including a magnitude 7.7 quake the day before, which had already caused considerable damage and unease. People are on edge. Some have even evacuated. But nothing could have prepared them for what was about to happen. At 3:11 p.m. local time, the Earth began to convulse. This wasn't just a shake, it was a sustained, violent upheaval, a deep guttural roar from the planet's core. The shaking lasted an agonizingly long time, approximately 10 minutes. For many, it felt like an eternity. Buildings already weakened by the foreshocks swayed violently, then disintegrated into dust and rubble. The ground liquefied in many areas, swallowing homes whole. Fissures opened up, roads buckled, and bridges twisted like discarded toys. Imagine standing on ground that feels like water, watching the world around you disintegrate, unable to stand, unable to move, trapped in a terrifying dance with the very planet itself. Survivors later described the experience as being tossed around like ragdolls inside a giant washing machine, the roar of the collapsing city a deafening counterpoint to the terrifying groaning of the earth. The sheer duration of the shaking meant that even structures that initially withstood the first shocks eventually succumbed to the relentless oscillation. Valdivia and the surrounding region were utterly devastated, reduced to a landscape of shattered dreams and broken lives. The estimated magnitude of this colossal event was an unprecedented 9.5 on the Richter scale, making it the strongest earthquake ever recorded in human history. To give you some perspective, each whole number increase on the Richter scale represents a 32-fold increase in energy released. So a 9.5 quake releases exponentially more energy than even a devastating 8.0 or 8.5. The rupture zone was immense, stretching approximately 1,000 kilometers or 620 miles along the Chilean coastline, releasing stress that had accumulated over centuries along the Nazca and South American plate boundary.
The immediate aftermath in Chile was catastrophic. The cities of Valdivia, Puerto Montt, and Concepcion bore the brunt of the seismic fury. Roads and railways were destroyed, communications severed, and power lines toppled. Entire towns were cut off from the outside world. Landslides cascaded down mountainsides, burying communities and altering the landscape. The city of Valdivia experienced a phenomenon known as subsidence, where large sections of land sank several meters, permanently flooding areas that were once dry. Rivers changed course, creating new lakes and altering ecosystems. Forests were submerged, turning into ghostly landscapes of drowned trees. But the Valdivia earthquake was far more than a localized disaster. Its immense energy, released along the ocean floor, triggered a series of colossal tsunamis that would sweep across the entire Pacific Ocean, leaving a trail of death and destruction thousands of miles away. Within minutes of the main shock, waves began to slam into the Chilean coast. In some places, these initial local tsunamis reached heights of over 25 meters or 80 feet, scouring coastal towns and dragging everything and everyone into the sea. Survivors clung to debris, desperately fighting for their lives against the relentless power of the ocean. However, these were just the opening acts. The truly global impact of the Valdivia earthquake would come from the far-traveling trans-Pacific tsunami. Hours after the initial quake, the first waves reached Hawaii, some 10,000 kilometers or 6,200 miles away. Hilo, on the Big Island, was particularly vulnerable due to its funnel-shaped bay, which amplified the incoming waves. At 1:04 a.m. on May 23rd, 22 hours after the Chilean earthquake, a series of waves, the largest reaching over 10 meters or 35 feet in height, slammed into Hilo. Homes, businesses, and entire blocks were obliterated. Cars were tossed around like toys. The waves picked up debris, turning it into deadly projectiles. In total, 61 people in Hilo lost their lives, many of whom had disregarded earlier warnings or returned to collect belongings after initial smaller waves. The devastation was so complete that Hilo effectively rebuilt its waterfront and implemented strict zoning laws to prevent future construction in vulnerable areas. The tsunami continued its relentless journey across the Pacific. Nearly 23 hours after the earthquake, at 3 a.m. local time on May 24th, it reached Japan. Despite being more than 16,000 kilometers or 10,000 miles away, the waves still arrived with devastating force, particularly along the country's northeastern coast. Though the main earthquake had occurred nearly a full day earlier and Japan had a tsunami warning system, the warnings were either too late, misunderstood, or underestimated in many remote areas. The waves, reaching up to 5.5 meters or 18 feet in height, destroyed over 1,600 homes and caused widespread flooding. In total, 142 people in Japan were killed or went missing, a grim testament to the far-reaching power of the Valdivia cataclysm. The tsunami also caused significant damage and fatalities in other Pacific Rim locations, including the Philippines, 21 dead, Easter Island, and even as far as California, where minor damage was reported to coastal structures. The human cost of the Valdivia earthquake and its subsequent tsunamis was immense. While exact figures vary due to the widespread destruction and disruption, estimates suggest that around 1,655 people died in Chile, with thousands more injured. The total death toll from the combined earthquake and tsunami events across the Pacific is often cited as over 2,000, though this figure is conservative given the challenges of counting fatalities in remote and impoverished regions. Economically, the damage was staggering.
estimated at over $500 million in 1960, equivalent to several billion today. Entire communities were wiped off the map, livelihoods destroyed, and vital infrastructure crippled. The long-term recovery in Chile was arduous. The government faced an unprecedented challenge in rebuilding homes, roads, and critical services. International aid poured in, but the scale of the disaster was overwhelming. Many survivors, particularly those who had lost everything, faced years of hardship. The event also highlighted Chile's extreme vulnerability to seismic activity, prompting a renewed focus on earthquake-resistant construction and disaster preparedness. Over time, Chile would become a world leader in seismic engineering, developing some of the most stringent building codes on Earth, a direct legacy of the 1960 Valdivia earthquake. Scientifically, the 1960 Valdivia earthquake was a pivotal moment. It provided undeniable, real-world evidence for the burgeoning theory of plate tectonics. Geologists and seismologists meticulously studied the massive rupture zone, the unprecedented duration of shaking, and the global reach of the tsunami. This event offered invaluable data that helped confirm how massive slabs of the Earth's crust, tectonic plates, move and interact, generating immense stress that is eventually released as earthquakes. The Valdivia quake, along with the 1964 Alaska earthquake, truly solidified the global acceptance of plate tectonics as the fundamental mechanism driving Earth's seismic activity. Furthermore, the Trans-Pacific tsunami highlighted the critical need for a robust international tsunami warning system. Before 1960, tsunami warnings were rudimentary and localized. The devastation in Hawaii and Japan, thousands of miles from the epicenter, underscored that an earthquake in one part of the world could have deadly consequences on distant shores. This led directly to the establishment and enhancement of the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center and the development of sophisticated seismic monitoring networks capable of rapidly detecting large undersea earthquakes and issuing warnings across vast ocean basins. Today, the global tsunami warning system owes much of its existence and effectiveness to the hard-learned lessons of the 1960 Valdivia disaster. The Great Chilean Earthquake was a brutal reminder of humanity's fragile place on a restless planet. Its tremendous roar was heard around the world, igniting an era of unparalleled scientific understanding and global cooperation in preparing for the unseen shake. Its scars remain etched not just on the Chilean landscape, but in the collective memory of a world awakened to the true, terrifying power of the Earth's pulse. From the fiery dawn of San Francisco's rebuilding, we journey north to a land where raw, untamed wilderness meets the restless pulse of our planet. This is Alaska, America's last frontier, a place of breathtaking beauty, formidable isolation, and a seismic history that would, in the spring of 1964, deliver a tremor so immense it would forever reshape our understanding of the Earth's pulse. Imagine Alaska in the mid-20th century. It had only been a state for 5 years, admitted to the Union in 1959. It was still very much a frontier, with vast, sparsely populated expanses, rugged mountains, and a sense of fierce independence. Cities like Anchorage, though growing, were small outposts in an enormous wilderness. Life revolved around fishing, oil, military bases, and a deep respect for the unforgiving natural world. People were tough, self-reliant, and accustomed to hardship. What they weren't fully prepared for was the sheer, unimaginable power that lay coiled beneath their feet. The date was Good Friday, March 27, 1964. The time was 5:36 p.m. Alaska Standard Time. Many Alaskans were either heading home from work, preparing for holiday meals, or attending church services. It was an ordinary evening, quiet, reflective. Then, without warning, the world roared.
The roar wasn't distant, it was immediate, a deep, guttural sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. A sound later described by survivors as a terrible grinding or the roar of 1,000 freight trains. Immediately after the sound, the ground began to shake, gently at first, then violently, then with an intensity that defied belief. This wasn't a tremor, it was a convulsion. The shaking lasted for an agonizing 4.5 to 5 minutes. Think about that. 5 minutes of continuous, violent shaking. For context, most major earthquakes last only seconds. Imagine 5 minutes of being unable to stand as the very ground beneath you liquefied, buildings crumbled, and the landscape twisted into grotesque parodies of itself. This was the Great Alaska Earthquake, later measured at an astonishing 9.2 magnitude. It remains the most powerful earthquake ever recorded in North American history and the second largest ever recorded worldwide, only surpassed by the 1960 Valdivia earthquake in Chile, which we'll discuss next. Its sheer scale was almost incomprehensible. The rupture zone stretched for nearly 500 miles from Valdez to Kodiak, a massive section of the Earth's crust suddenly lurching and tearing. Geologically, this was a megathrust earthquake occurring where the Pacific plate is subducting or diving beneath the North American plate. Over millennia, immense stress had built up along this colossal fault line. On that Good Friday, the fault finally ruptured, causing a massive section of the seafloor and coastline to suddenly lurch upward and sideways. Some coastal areas were thrust skyward by as much as 30 feet, while others subsided or sank by similar amounts. The energy released was equivalent to detonating hundreds of megatons of TNT. The immediate impact was catastrophic. In Anchorage, the largest city, about 75 miles northwest of the epicenter, the ground turned to liquid. Built partly on unstable clay and gravel deposits, large sections of the city suffered massive liquefaction, where solid ground behaved like quicksand. The most iconic destruction occurred in Turnagain Heights, a residential bluff overlooking Cook Inlet. Here, enormous landslides tore through entire neighborhoods. Homes slid hundreds of feet down the bluffs, collapsing into twisted wreckage. Streets buckled into impassable ravines, and utility lines snapped. Imagine seeing your neighbor's house, a solid structure just moments before, slowly slide into an abyss, shattering as it went. Downtown Anchorage suffered immense damage as well. 4th Avenue, a main commercial street, dropped by as much as 10 feet in places, creating massive fissures that swallowed cars and people. Buildings designed for Alaska's harsh winters, but not its colossal seismic forces, pancaked. Concrete and steel structures, including a newly built apartment complex, pancaked. Fires sparked by ruptured gas lines and overturned stoves added to the chaos, though many were quickly extinguished by the freezing temperatures or lack of oxygen and collapsed spaces. But the earthquake's primary killer wasn't the shaking, it was the tsunamis. The massive vertical displacement of the seafloor generated colossal waves, both local and distant. The local tsunamis were the most deadly. In coastal communities closer to the rupture, water arrived within minutes of the shaking, giving residents no time to react. Valdez, a port town at the head of Prince William Sound, experienced unimaginable horror. The earthquake triggered an underwater landslide in the harbor, which generated a massive local tsunami. Waves as high as 220 feet or 67 meters slammed into the port, sweeping away docks, ships, and the entire town. What wasn't swallowed by the sea was buried by debris or consumed by the subsequent aftershocks and smaller waves. Many residents, fleeing the initial shaking, ran directly into the path of the incoming water. The small alluvial village of Chenega on Chenega Island in Prince William Sound was almost entirely wiped out. A massive local tsunami, estimated at over 70 feet, struck just minutes after the quake. Of the 68 villagers, 23 were killed, a devastating loss. Only 2 houses remain standing. Similar scenes of destruction played out in other coastal towns and villages, including Seward, where an oil storage facility burst into flames, creating a firestorm on the water, and Kodiak, a major fishing port. The disproportionate impact on remote coastal native villages, often with traditional wooden structures and close proximity to the water, highlighted the vulnerability of these isolated communities. The Great Alaska Earthquake also generated a Pacific-wide tsunami, a true ocean-spanning event. These waves, traveling at jet plane speeds across the open ocean, were less catastrophic than the local tsunamis, but still deadly. They reached Canada, killing 12 people on Vancouver Island, the U.S. West Coast, causing significant damage and killing 4 in Crescent City, California, and affecting other ports down to Los Angeles, and even Hawaii. This distant reach underscored the interconnectedness of the Earth's oceans and the global threat posed by megathrust earthquakes. The human toll, though remarkably low given the quake's immense power and the subsequent tsunamis, 139 lives lost compared to the estimated 3,000 in San Francisco or 100,000 in Kanto, was a testament to Alaska's sparse population and the timing of the quake. Many people were out of vulnerable buildings or in open spaces. But for those affected, the experience was utterly terrifying. Survivors spoke of cars bouncing like toys, trees snapping like toothpicks, and the ground undulating like waves on the ocean. The psychological trauma was immense, leaving indelible scars on a generation of Alaskans. The immediate response was a monumental challenge. Communications were severed. Roads were destroyed. Airports were damaged. The vastness of Alaska, usually its charm, became an obstacle. Military personnel from nearby bases were among the first responders, organizing search and rescue efforts, distributing supplies, and establishing temporary shelters. The sheer cold added another layer of difficulty. Temperatures hovered below freezing, making survival even harder for those stranded or homeless. The 1964 Alaska earthquake was a catastrophe, but it was also a profound scientific revelation, a brutal natural experiment that dramatically advanced the nascent field of seismology and catalyzed America's understanding of its restless planet. While it predated the full acceptance of plate tectonics theory, which would solidify in the late 1960s, the Alaska quake provided undeniable, massive evidence that would help confirm it. Scientists, particularly those from the U.S. Geological Survey (USGS) and academic institutions, immediately descended on Alaska. Led by pioneering geologists and seismologists, they meticulously mapped the rupture, observed the massive vertical and horizontal displacements, and documented the widespread liquefaction and land level changes. The sheer scale of the uplift and subsidence along the coast provided irrefutable proof of massive crustal deformation, precisely what would be expected in a subduction zone where one plate is diving beneath another. The observations from Alaska provided a real-world, large-scale example of elastic rebound theory, first articulated after the 1906 San Francisco quake on a grand planetary scale, extending its application to the powerful megathrust environments. Beyond the confirmation of plate tectonics, the Alaska quake revolutionized our understanding of tsunami generation. Scientists learned that tsunamis could be generated not just from direct seafloor displacement, as with the Pacific-wide waves, but also by underwater landslides triggered by seismic shaking, as devastatingly demonstrated in Valdez and Chenega. This distinction was critical for developing effective warning systems. The event also dramatically accelerated the development and expansion of the Pacific Tsunami Watching Center, PTWC. Established in 1949 after a destructive tsunami hit Hawaii, PTWC's capabilities were significantly bolstered after 1964. The need for a robust, real-time global monitoring network became undeniable. Investments were made in advanced seismic sensors, deep ocean pressure gauges, and international communication protocols to ensure that warnings could be issued rapidly and effectively across the Pacific Rim, potentially saving countless lives from future distant tsunamis. In terms of building codes and land use planning, Alaska provided harsh but invaluable lessons. The widespread liquefaction in Anchorage, particularly in areas like Turnagain Heights, highlighted the extreme vulnerability of structures built on unstable ground, especially reclaimed land or loose sediments. This led to a complete reevaluation of seismic zonation and land use practices in earthquake-prone regions. Urban planners and engineers began to understand that it wasn't just where you built, but what you built on. Stricter building codes were developed, emphasizing resilient construction that could withstand not just shaking, but also ground deformation and liquefaction. The experience underscored the importance of geological surveys prior to construction, ensuring new developments avoided high-risk areas.
The 1964 Alaska earthquake, though a regional disaster, served as America's seismic awakening. Before this event, earthquake awareness in the U.S. was largely centered on California and the San Andreas Fault. Alaska proved that colossal, deadly earthquakes were a national concern, affecting vast regions of the country, not just the Golden State. It shifted the national conversation from a California-centric view of seismic hazards to a broader understanding of subduction zone threats, distant tsunamis, and the complex geologic processes that shape the North American continent.
From the ashes and rubble of Anchorage, Valdez, and countless small communities, a new era of scientific understanding and disaster preparedness emerged. Alaska rebuilt, stronger and wiser, scarred but not broken. The unforgettable tremor of Good Friday 1964 was a tragic reminder of our planet's immense power, but it also became a pivotal moment in humanity's ongoing quest to listen to the Earth's pulse, understand its language, and learn to live with resilience and respect on a constantly restless world. We've traced the Earth's restless pulse from ancient Mesopotamia, where tremors were divine wrath, through the Enlightenment, when scientific inquiry began to awaken. We've witnessed colossal quakes that shifted continents and philosophies, shaking down cities and reshaping nations. But as the 20th century drew to a close, humanity stood at a new precipice. The 21st century, with its hyper-connected global village, its burgeoning technologies, and its increasingly dense urban centers, would face seismic challenges unlike any before. The Earth, indifferent to human progress, continued its tectonic dance. And in this new millennium, a series of devastating earthquakes would not just claim countless lives, but would brutally reshape modern disaster response, forcing humanity to confront unprecedented vulnerabilities and forge new pathways for resilience, warning, and recovery. The dawn of the 21st century promised unparalleled technological advancement, instant communication, and a globalized world. But it also brought a stark, often brutal reminder that humanity remains profoundly vulnerable to the raw power of our planet. The great earthquakes and tsunamis of this new millennium would expose critical fault lines, not just in the Earth's crust, but in our systems of preparedness, response, and resilience. These were the shocks that shattered complacency and forced a radical reevaluation of how we live with a restless planet. Our first major shock came on December 26, 2004, a Boxing Day morning that forever altered the lives of millions across the Indian Ocean. What began as a monstrous rumble off the coast of Sumatra, Indonesia, quickly escalated into the Sumatra Andaman earthquake, an event of terrifying scale. Estimated at a magnitude 9.1 to 9.3, it was the third largest earthquake ever recorded, unleashing an unimaginable amount of energy as the Indian plate subducted beneath the Burma plate. The shaking lasted an agonizing 8 to 10 minutes, deforming the seabed and creating a colossal vertical displacement of water. This wasn't just a powerful earthquake, it was the birth of a monstrous transoceanic tsunami. With no adequate warning system in place for the Indian Ocean, the waves traveled silently, relentlessly across thousands of miles of open water, gathering height and momentum. Within minutes, the coasts of Sumatra were engulfed by waves over 30 meters, 100 feet high, sweeping away entire towns and villages with terrifying speed. But the devastation didn't stop there. Hours later, the tsunami slammed into Thailand, Sri Lanka, India, and even reached the distant shores of East Africa. Beaches bustling with tourists, fishing villages, and bustling ports were utterly annihilated. People had no time to react, no information to flee. The blue skies of a beautiful morning quickly turned into a scene of unimaginable horror. The human cost was staggering. Over 230,000 people killed or missing across 14 countries, making it one of the deadliest natural disasters in recorded history. Entire communities vanished. Millions were displaced. The sheer scale of destruction, the indiscriminate nature of the killer waves, and the global reach of the tragedy shocked the world to its core. The 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami served as a brutal, undeniable wake-up call for global disaster preparedness. The most profound lesson was the critical, life-saving importance of tsunami early warning systems. The absence of such a system in the Indian Ocean meant that communities had no chance to escape. In the aftermath, a massive international effort led to the establishment and enhancement of the Indian Ocean Tsunami Warning and Mitigation System, IOTWMS, a network of seismic sensors, deep ocean buoys, and communication protocols designed to detect undersea earthquakes and issue timely tsunami warnings to vulnerable coastal regions. This system, along with improvements to the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center and the establishment of similar regional centers, fundamentally transformed how the world monitors and responds to tsunami threats. Furthermore, the disaster highlighted the immense challenges of international aid coordination in a multi-country catastrophe. The outpouring of global generosity was unprecedented, but the sheer volume of aid, coupled with damaged infrastructure and fragmented communication, often led to logistical bottlenecks and inefficiencies. It spurred efforts to standardize humanitarian response protocols, improve interagency cooperation, and better utilize local capacities in affected regions. The 2004 tsunami literally reshaped the landscape of global disaster response, shifting focus from mere recovery to proactive prevention and preparedness on an international scale. Just 6 years later, on January 12, 2010, a very different kind of seismic shock would expose a different, yet equally devastating vulnerability: the profound impact of poverty and weak infrastructure. The Haiti earthquake, a magnitude 7.0 tremor that struck just 25 kilometers, 16 miles southwest of the capital Port-au-Prince. The quake itself was not as massive as the 2004 Sumatra event, but its shallow depth and proximity to a densely populated, poverty-stricken city meant it delivered a catastrophic blow. The shaking lasted less than a minute, but the damage was immediate and absolute. Buildings collapsed, roadways crumbled, the sunlight blocked out by dust.
Port-au-Prince, a city built largely on precarious hillsides and poorly constructed concrete buildings, crumbled. Homes, schools, hospitals, and government buildings disintegrated into dust and rubble. The National Palace, a symbol of Haitian sovereignty, collapsed. The main port, the country's lifeline for imports, was severely damaged. What truly amplified the catastrophe was Haiti's extreme vulnerability. Decades of political instability, corruption, and underdevelopment had left the nation with virtually no building codes, no emergency services, and no disaster preparedness infrastructure. The human toll was horrific. An estimated 220,000 to 300,000 people killed, hundreds of thousands injured, and over 1.5 million left homeless. The government, already fragile,
was effectively decapitated, with many officials and emergency responders among the casualties. The immediate aftermath was pure chaos, a desperate scramble for survival amidst unimaginable suffering. Lack of food, water, medical supplies, and sanitation quickly led to a humanitarian crisis of epic proportions. The Haiti earthquake became a stark, painful lesson in the critical role of governance and infrastructure in disaster resilience. It underscored that geological vulnerability is amplified exponentially by poverty and weak state capacity. The international response was swift and massive, with billions of dollars in aid and thousands of international relief workers pouring into the country. However, the sheer scale of the aid also highlighted significant challenges in aid coordination. The absence of a functioning central government and the proliferation of hundreds of NGOs, often operating independently, led to duplication of efforts, logistical bottlenecks, and a fragmented response that sometimes struggled to meet the immediate needs of the population effectively. Haiti forced the humanitarian community to reevaluate approaches to aid delivery in failed or extremely fragile states. It spurred discussions on strengthening local governance, investing in long-term development alongside immediate relief, and improving coordination mechanisms among international actors. It also brought renewed attention to the importance of building back better, emphasizing earthquake-resistant construction and resilient urban planning, not just as a post-disaster measure, but as a proactive development strategy for vulnerable nations worldwide. Then, on March 11, 2011, the world watched in stunned silence as Japan, a nation renowned for earthquake preparedness, faced a triple catastrophe that pushed even its advanced systems to its limits. The Great East Japan Earthquake, a magnitude 9.1 megathrust event, struck off the coast of Tohoku. It was the most powerful earthquake ever recorded in Japan and the fourth largest in the world. The ground shaking was immense, lasting up to 6 minutes in some areas, causing widespread damage, particularly to infrastructure like roads, railways, and homes. But like the 2004 event, the seismic fury was merely the overture. The earthquake generated a monstrous tsunami that slammed into Japan's northeastern coast with unimaginable force. Waves, in some places reaching over 40 meters or 130 feet high, breached seawalls and overwhelmed coastal communities, sweeping away entire towns, ships, cars, and millions of tons of debris. The devastation was absolute, turning vibrant landscapes into a watery wasteland. And still the nightmare continued. The tsunami caused a catastrophic failure at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, triggering meltdowns in 3 reactors and releasing radioactive materials into the environment. This cascading disaster, earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear crisis created an unprecedented challenge for response. The human toll was immense, an estimated 220,000 to 300,000 people killed or missing, mainly due to the tsunami, and hundreds of thousands displaced. The economic cost was staggering, estimated at over $300 billion, making it the most expensive natural disaster in history. The Great East Japan Earthquake and Tsunami was a profound, humbling lesson for even the most prepared nations. It demonstrated that while robust building codes and early warning systems are critical, Japan's earthquake-resistant buildings largely withstood the shaking, and its tsunami warning system saved countless lives. No nation is entirely immune to the unpredictable power of nature and the potential for cascading failures. One of the key lessons was the complex challenge of nuclear disaster response in a multi-hazard scenario. Fukushima exposed vulnerabilities in emergency preparedness for such complex events, particularly the difficulty of coordinating evacuation, managing public information, and mitigating long-term environmental and health impacts. It also forced a global reevaluation of nuclear safety standards and disaster planning. The event also highlighted the importance of resilience in critical infrastructure beyond just initial resistance, emphasizing the need for redundant systems, diversified energy sources, and more robust backup power for essential services. Japan's meticulous recovery efforts showcased the strength of community bonds and a deeply ingrained culture of preparedness, but the long-term societal and psychological impacts of displacement and contamination posed new challenges for disaster management that extended far beyond immediate relief. In 2015, the ancient Himalayan kingdom of Nepal suffered a devastating magnitude 7.8 earthquake, followed by a powerful magnitude 7.3 aftershock weeks later. The main quake struck near Kathmandu, the densely populated capital, a city renowned for its rich cultural heritage with ancient temples, palaces, and stupas dating back centuries. Nepal, one of the poorest countries in Asia, was acutely vulnerable. Its traditional brick and mud mortar buildings were highly susceptible to seismic forces, and its mountainous terrain made access for aid challenging. The ground shaking caused widespread collapse of these unreinforced masonry structures, particularly in the Kathmandu Valley. Historic landmarks, including several UNESCO World Heritage Sites, crumbled into rubble. Entire villages in remote mountain regions were flattened by landslides and rockfalls. The immediate aftermath was a scene of utter devastation. An estimated 9,000 people killed, nearly 22,000 injured, and millions displaced. Initial response was hampered by severe damage to roads, communications networks, and the limited capacity of Nepal's own emergency services. The Nepal earthquakes provided critical lessons in disaster response in geographically challenging and economically vulnerable regions. It highlighted the immense difficulty of delivering aid in mountainous terrain, underscoring the need for specialized search and rescue teams capable of operating in remote, unstable environments, and the crucial role of aerial logistics, helicopters, in reaching cut-off communities. The widespread destruction of ancient heritage sites also brought a renewed global focus on cultural heritage protection in disaster preparedness. It emphasized the importance of pre-disaster documentation, mitigation strategies for historic structures, and specialized recovery efforts for cultural treasures. Furthermore, Nepal demonstrated the growing, albeit chaotic, role of social media and digital platforms in early disaster response. From citizens sharing immediate information and coordinating informal relief efforts, to aid organizations leveraging crowdfunding and remote mapping for situational awareness. The earthquake underscored the need to integrate these informal digital networks into official response strategies. Finally, most recently, on February 6, 2023, the world was again reminded of the brutal power of convergent disasters when two massive earthquakes, a magnitude 7.8 and a magnitude 7.5, struck southeastern Turkey and northern Syria within hours of each other. The tremors tore through a densely populated region spanning multiple major cities and crossing an international border with devastating consequences. The shallow depth and immense rupture zone of the quakes caused widespread catastrophic destruction across a vast area already reeling from a decade of civil war and humanitarian crisis in Syria. Cities like Gaziantep, Antakya, and Kahramanmaraş in Turkey, and Aleppo and Idlib in Syria were utterly leveled. Thousands of multi-story apartment buildings, many poorly constructed, pancaked into rubble, entrapping countless residents. Roads, airports, and communication lines were severed. The destruction was so immense it defied immediate comprehension. The dual quakes, coupled with freezing winter conditions, compounded the humanitarian crisis. The human toll was horrific. Over 59,000 people killed, with tens of thousands more injured and millions displaced across both countries. The response was immediate and global, but quickly bogged down by the complexities of the affected region. The Turkey-Syria earthquakes offered immediate, stark lessons in multi-layered disaster response. They painfully highlighted the critical challenges of trans-border disaster management, particularly when one of the affected regions is a war zone. Aid efforts in northern Syria were severely hampered by political divisions, damaged border crossings, and a complex web of armed groups and sanctions, leading to a slower and less effective humanitarian response than in Turkey. This underscored the urgent need for established, impartial humanitarian corridors and flexible aid mechanisms in conflict-affected areas. The sheer scale of urban destruction in densely populated areas also posed immense challenges for search and rescue operations. The vast quantities of rubble required heavy machinery and specialized expertise, while the freezing temperatures made every minute critical for trapped survivors. It reinforced the importance of robust urban planning, stringent building codes, and rapid deployment of international urban search and rescue teams. The disaster also highlighted the continued importance of early warning and public education, particularly in earthquake-prone regions, for promoting immediate protective actions during a seismic event. From the unforeseen tsunami of 2004 to the multi-layered catastrophe of 2023, the 21st century has brought relentless reminders of the Earth's dynamic nature. Each shock, however tragic, has pushed humanity towards greater understanding, refined warning systems, improved aid coordination, and a deeper, more sober appreciation of our planet's power. We are learning to live with a restless planet, not by taming it, but by building smarter, responding faster, and remembering that while the Earth will always move, our resilience, our capacity to adapt, and our commitment to each other must never stand still. The Earth, as we've journeyed through its history, is a living, breathing entity, constantly shifting and reminding us of our fragile place upon its surface. From ancient whispers of angry gods to the thunderous roars of the 20th century, humanity has slowly, painfully peeled back the layers of mystery surrounding earthquakes. We've learned that they are not divine retribution or monstrous stirrings, but the inevitable consequence of a dynamic, active planet. A planet's restless pulse has shaped continents, built mountains, and at times brought civilizations to their knees. But what now? As we stand on the precipice of understanding, are we merely resigned to the Earth's unpredictable shivers, or have we finally learned to live with its tremendous power? Tonight, as we ease into the final chapter of our seismic story, we turn our attention to the modern age. We'll explore how humanity, armed with hard-earned knowledge and cutting-edge technology, is learning not to prevent earthquakes, for that remains beyond our grasp, but to predict, prepare for, and ultimately endure them. This is the story of modern early warning systems, the incredible feats of engineering that build resilient cities, and the continuous journey of living wisely on a restless planet. One of the most remarkable advancements in our battle against the unseen shake is the birth of early warning systems. Imagine a warning, even if just a few seconds or a minute, that an earthquake is coming. It sounds like science fiction, but it's a reality in many seismic zones today. The science behind it is deceptively simple, based on the physics of seismic waves. When an earthquake strikes, it doesn't just send out one type of wave, it sends out several. The first to arrive are the P waves, or primary waves. Think of them as compressional waves, like a sudden push or pull. They travel fast, often at several miles per second, and while they can cause minor shaking, they are rarely destructive. Following them, slower but far more destructive, are the S waves, or secondary waves. These are shear waves, causing the ground to shake violently from side to side or up and down. They are the ones that topple buildings and cause widespread devastation. The key to early warning lies in this difference in speed. Seismographs, highly sensitive instruments designed to detect ground motion, are strategically placed along fault lines. When an earthquake occurs, these sensors detect the fast-moving P waves first, This initial detection triggers an alarm. Computers analyze the data almost instantly, estimating the earthquake's location and magnitude. If the magnitude is significant and the P waves indicate strong S waves are on their way, an alert can be sent out to areas further from the epicenter, giving them a precious few seconds or even a minute or two of warning before the destructive S waves arrive. Japan, a nation intimately familiar with the Earth's relentless activity, has been a pioneer in this field. Lessons learned from devastating events like the 1923 Great Kanto earthquake and the far-reaching tsunamis from the 1960 Valdivia quake spurred intense research. Today, Japan boasts one of the most advanced early warning systems in the world. Its J-Alert system, operational since 2007, sends out immediate warnings via TV, radio, cell phones, and even public loudspeakers. Think of it. You're sitting in a high-rise office in Tokyo, and your phone buzzes with an alert, "Earthquake coming," in 30 seconds. While those near the epicenter get little to no warning, those further away can receive crucial time to act. Slow down bullet trains, automatically shut off gas lines, enable elevators to stop at the nearest floor, and most importantly, for individuals to drop, cover, and hold on. In the United States, systems like Shake Alert, active along the West Coast, are also providing similar precious seconds. While these systems are not perfect, near epicenter areas might receive the warning too late, and false alarms can occur. They represent a monumental leap from the ancient world's helpless terror. They embody our growing ability to harness scientific understanding to mitigate disaster, turning seconds into potential lifesavers. Beyond the warnings, modern humanity has also learned to build smarter. The scars left by past cataclysms have become invaluable blueprints for resilient cities. Each major historical earthquake taught us a brutal but vital lesson about construction and urban planning. Take the Lisbon quake of 1755. Its immense destruction spurred the Marquis de Pombal to rebuild Lisbon with the world's first deliberately earthquake-resistant architecture. His Pombalic cage, a flexible wooden framework integrated within masonry walls, allowed buildings to sway rather than shatter. It was a revolutionary insight. Structures needed to flex with the earth, not rigidly resist it. The San Francisco earthquake of 1906, with its devastating firestorm, taught us that fires, not just shaking, could be the primary destroyer. The lessons led to better fireproofing, redundant water supply systems, and the implementation of more robust building codes informed by the newly understood elastic rebound theory, which explained how faults moved. Japan's Great Kanto devastation of 1923 underscored the dangers of liquefaction and densely packed wooden structures. In response, Japan embraced steel and reinforced concrete, wider streets, and a national commitment to seismic engineering that would make it a global leader in earthquake-resistant construction. And the 1960 Valdivia earthquake, the largest ever recorded, provided invaluable data on long-duration ground motion and the far-reaching power of tsunamis. Chile, already seismically active, responded by developing some of the world's most stringent building codes, emphasizing ductility and the ability of structures to withstand prolonged shaking.
Today, these lessons have coalesced into sophisticated modern seismic engineering principles. Base isolation. This is perhaps the most elegant solution. Buildings are floated on flexible bearings or shock absorbers, usually made of rubber and steel, separating the structure from the ground's violent motion. Imagine your building gently swaying on its own while the ground beneath it dances wildly. Dampers and shock absorbers, similar to a car's suspension, these devices are integrated into a building's frame to dissipate seismic energy, converting it into heat and reducing the force transmitted to the structure. Flexible materials and designs. While concrete and steel are strong, their strength is amplified by incorporating flexibility. Reinforced concrete, with its rebar, allows buildings to bend and deform without immediate collapse. Steel frames are designed with ductile connections that can stretch without breaking. Shear walls and bracing. These stiff walls or diagonal braces are strategically placed within a building's core or perimeter to resist lateral forces from shaking, distributing the stress evenly throughout the structure. Liquefaction mitigation. In areas prone to liquefaction, where saturated soil loses strength and behaves like a liquid during shaking, engineers employ techniques like ground improvement, compacting soil, injecting grout, or using deep foundations that extend below liquefiable layers. Tsunami walls and evacuation plans. For coastal cities, physical barriers like seawalls, elevated structures, and meticulously planned evacuation routes and vertical evacuation buildings, tall, reinforced structures designed to shelter people during a tsunami, are crucial for survival. Beyond individual buildings, urban planning plays a critical role. Cities in seismic zones are now incorporating lessons learned from history, avoiding construction directly on active fault lines, zoning laws that limit density in liquefaction-prone areas, and creating wider streets that can act as fire breaks and evacuation routes. The concept of distributed infrastructure with multiple water mains and power lines ensures that a single rupture doesn't cripple an entire city. Retrofitting older vulnerable buildings is a continuous, costly but essential process, strengthening the existing urban fabric against future shakes. But engineering and warning systems are only part of the equation. The human element, preparedness and public education, remains paramount. What use is an early warning system if people don't know how to react? What good are resilient buildings if citizens panic and injure themselves in a rush? The universal advice, drop, cover, hold on, is the cornerstone of individual preparedness. Dropping to your hands and knees, taking cover under a sturdy piece of furniture, and holding on until the shaking stops can drastically reduce injuries from falling objects. Beyond this immediate reaction, proactive measures are key. Emergency kits. Every household in a seismic zone should have a kit with water, non-perishable food, first aid supplies, flashlights, a radio, and essential medications. Family plans. Establishing meeting points, out-of-state contacts, and communication strategies helps families reunite and account for loved ones in the chaotic aftermath. Community drills. Regular, realistic earthquake drills in schools, workplaces, and communities, like Japan's annual Disaster Preparedness Day, instill muscle memory and reduce panic when a real quake strikes. This shared experience fosters a sense of collective resilience. Governments and non-governmental organizations, NGOs, play a vital role in coordinating large-scale disaster response. Rapid search and rescue, medical aid, food and water distribution, and the restoration of critical infrastructure. International cooperation in disaster relief, sharing resources, expertise, and lessons learned from every major event, has become a global standard. As we conclude our journey through the Earth's deadliest tremors, it's clear that living with a restless planet is an ongoing challenge. We cannot stop the tectonic plates from grinding, the faults from rupturing, or the ground from shaking. The quest for accurate earthquake prediction, knowing precisely when and where an earthquake will strike, remains elusive, likely impossible due to the immense complexities of subterranean forces. Our focus has shifted to forecasting, and more importantly, to resilience. Yet there's a deeper truth to embrace. The Earth's dynamism, the very forces that cause earthquakes, are also what make our planet habitable. Plate tectonics drives volcanic activity, which has shaped our atmosphere, created fertile soils, and brought valuable mineral deposits to the surface. Geothermal energy, a clean power source, is a direct result of the Earth's internal heat. Living on a dynamic planet means coexisting with its inherent risks, but also benefiting from its life-sustaining processes. The story of humanity and earthquakes is one of continuous adaptation, innovation, and learning from catastrophe. From ancient civilizations seeking meaning in the shivers to modern scientists listening to the Earth's pulse with instruments and data, our relationship with our home has fundamentally changed. We've replaced fear with knowledge, superstition with science, and vulnerability with a stubborn, resourceful determination to build a safer, more resilient future. The unseen shake will come again, but this time, humanity is listening, building, and together, enduring. So, as the sounds of the Earth's restless pulse fade into the quiet hum of tonight, remember that every tremor, every cataclysm has taught us something profound. It has forged our understanding, shaped our cities, and ultimately strengthened our resolve. Sweet dreams, and sleep tight.